Good evening and welcome to the February 3rd, 2020 regular meeting of the Mayor and City Council. First item on our agenda tonight is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to invite the Scouts from Pack 221 to come up to the podium and lead us in the pledge. If everyone could please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Well done to the Scouts. Next item on our agenda is reflection. I'd like to call for a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is approval of minutes, and tonight we have one set of minutes to approve from the regular session on Tuesday, January 21st. What is the pleasure of the council?
Mayor, I'd like to move the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
One abstention.
And one abstention. So that carries 3-0-1, with the one abstention being Councilmember Spiegel. Next, we have presentations. I'd like to invite Vice President Sales to join me at the podium. Also like to invite Washington Sangu. Is Washington here? Well, I'd like to invite the rest of the Multicultural Affairs Committee to come join me down there as we proclaim African American History Month. Whoever wants to accept position. Okay. I'm going to have Lorianne read the background material, please.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. All right, so African American History Month, or Black History Month, is celebrated annually in the United States during the month of February. The celebration was started in 1926 by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who wanted to bring national attention to the important contributions of African Americans to the history of the United States. Woodson chose February because it includes the birthdays of Frederick Douglass, Langston Hughes, and Abraham Lincoln. The city will be celebrating African American History Month with a variety of programs. An African American art exhibit will take place at the Activity Center at Bower Park through March 30th, 2020. With the works of mixed media artist Magruder Murray, a reception was held on January 30th to celebrate his accomplishments. Additionally, the city will host an event on February 15th at the Community Museum titled Black History in the Museum from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. On February 22nd, Casey Community Center will present the film A Ballerina's Tale about African-American ballerina Misty Copeland. And on February 25th, the Benjamin Gaither Center will host a presentation by Dr. Elwood Gray titled American Minority Veterans Research Project. Visit the city's website for additional details and programs. Thank you.
And I have a proclamation of the Mayor and City Council of Gaithersburg. Whereas the history of African Americans is unique and rich and has helped define what it means to be an American. And whereas African Americans have come to know the freedoms fought for in establishing the United States, gained through the application of our founding principles of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to assembly, and due process of law. And whereas African Americans have worked collectively to remove systemic racism and discrimination that pervaded our laws and our public consciousness for decades, steadily making progress through the work of Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Thurgood Marshall, and others. And whereas African Americans have contributed greatly to the success of our nation in the areas of commerce, business, politics, education, medicine, and the arts, now therefore I, Judd Ashman, by the power vested in me as Mayor of Gaithersburg, do hereby proclaim February 2020 as African American History Month in the city of Gaithersburg and encourage all government officials, educators, businesses, and residents of the city to honor, recognize, and celebrate the contributions of African Americans to the culture and well-being of our community. Proclaim this third day of February 2020, signed by me, and let's give everyone on our Multicultural Affairs Committee a great round of applause.
I read that the true proclamation goes to my husband, Washington Songu. We have been residents of Gaithersburg for over 20 years. Unfortunately, he is still at the hospital. He works there, and so he is getting off shift and trying to get here as much as possible. I'm sure he'd be pleased that I took this in his name, and I will share it with him. And we also wanted to thank the mayor and the city council and the Multicultural Committee for bringing the true diversity of the city of Gaithersburg. Thank you very much.
Next, we have an update on the DMV Racial Equity Cohort from Kevin Edders, Tammy Castillo, and Chris Vance. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I am Kevin Edders with the Department of Public Works and a member of the Racial Equity team. During our presentation this evening, we will introduce the team members, provide background information on the cohort, address why racial equity is important, and explain the tools and processes that we are utilizing to begin our work. This work is a necessary foundation for moving the city toward racial equity. My fellow team members are Tam Castillo from Department of Parks, Recreation, and Culture, Lieutenant Chris Vance from the Police Department, Patrice Payne from Community and Public Relations, and Nathan Bassett from Finance and Administration. Our work is facilitated by the Deputy City Manager and Singer. And now I hand off to Tam to start the presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity to attend a DMV cohort with peers from 10 other jurisdictions. GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, has led meetings downtown, and the team will continue to attend a monthly meeting through June of this year. The cohort offers cross-jurisdictional collaboration and includes deep dive learning sessions on topics such as equity development, which covers community development, planning, zoning, and housing, public safety and court services, transportation and mobility, and governing for equity, which covers a multitude of topics such as governing and business, procurement, human resources, leadership, and workforce development. Two participating jurisdictions similar to size of the city are the City of College Park and the City of Tacoma Park. And now, for more information on GARE, our host, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity provides members a professional peer-to-peer network that enables collaboration. This is a joint project of both Race Forward and the Haas Institute of a Fair and Inclusive Society. The new Race Forward began in 2017 when it united with the Center for Social Inclusion to strengthen their efforts. Race Forward was initially founded in 1981, while CSI, the Center for Social Inclusion, was founded in 2002. The Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society was founded in 2010. The overarching goal of the three members is targeted universalism, which is to achieve racial equity and advance opportunities for all. Regional hubs are utilized by GARE to build cross-jurisdictional relationships so that maximum impact may be achieved by utilizing cross-sector strategies. The hubs seek to have a critical mass in the region to normalize expectations of the government. One of the oldest members of the East Regional Hub is one of our participating jurisdiction members and is Fairfax County, which adopted their One Fairfax policy November 20th, 2017. And now to Lieutenant Vance.
Good evening. The first concept I'm going to discuss is that racial equity is very different than racial equality. This is the basic components that we are learning. While equality is about giving the same opportunities to all people, racial equity is about the processes that focus on providing the same outcome for all people. Racial equity is necessary to eliminate the barriers faced by people in communities of color that impact life outcomes. Like this graphic shows, merely providing the same opportunities, the boxes that these individuals are standing on, does not mean we are providing the same outcomes, seeing over the fence. In order to serve a diverse group of Gaithersburg's customers, we need to apply racial equity tools to improve the outcomes of Black and brown people, which in turn improves the outcomes of all people. This slide talks about why is racial equity important in Gaithersburg. As we know, Gaithersburg is one of the most diverse cities in America. In fact, our diversity is what makes Gaithersburg the greatest city in the world. However, that does not mean that racial equity is not needed here. Rather, the opposite is true. We need to focus on racial equity more than other cities because of the diverse needs of our customers. If we are not focused on identifying and eliminating the barriers that prevent positive life outcomes for people of color, then we are reinforcing those barriers. GARE has a template for improving racial equity. The framework is a three-pronged approach that enables organizations to successfully institute racial equity culture within the organization. That framework involves 3 steps: normalizing, organizing, and operationalizing. Normalizing focuses on trainings and discussions that help employees become more comfortable in talking about issues of race. This is the first step in being able to look at decisions and policies through the racial equity lens. This helps us to see things differently, rearrange our priorities in order to maximize positive outcomes for people of color. The second step is organizing. This step focuses on building relationships with all stakeholders involved, both internal and external to our organization. While normalizing focuses on what is racial equity, organizing focuses on who will assist with this movement and keep it moving for many years. The final step is operationalize. This is simply a data-driven approach to racial equity problem solving. Using data that is focused on race allows us to see problems and disproportionate life outcomes for people of color that may not be self-evident without that data. Using all 3 of these approaches, we can use data to identify problems and required actions, then use stakeholders to apply the racial equity lens to maximize life outcomes for people of color. This is the template for racial equity work. However, the next steps is to customize this and tailor this to Gaithersburg's needs. And Kevin's going to talk about that now.
Thank you, Chris. So what is a racial equity tool process? This is a process that will introduce a racial equity lens in our decision making. Start with a desired results statement, looking specifically at the Gaithersburg community. And we tailor it to unique challenges within our city. For example, desired results statement will be all people in Gaithersburg are connected, healthy, and active. From there, you work through the steps. The racial equity tool process proactively seeks to eliminate racial inequities and advance racial equities. identifies clear goals, objectives, and measurable outcomes. Actively inserts racial equity into the decision-making process. Informs decisions to maximize benefit to and minimize burden on people and communities of color. It also develops mechanisms for successful implementation, evaluation, and accountability of impact. Our racial equity kickoff. Are we setting an example in our area and working to eliminate structural barriers that disproportionately affect people and communities of color? This is an opportunity for the city to lead by example. Collecting racial data is essential to identifying problems or issues that affect racial equity outcomes. As Chris stated earlier, these issues may not be self-evident without the data. All racial data collected is self-reported. We are working with the Human Resources Department to ensure that people of color are not negatively affected at any point in the hiring process, as well as upward mobility during employment. Racial data will be collected from applications and then analyzed. We are working with the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Culture to ensure that services and programs that they provide meet the needs of our diverse community that we serve. The department uses the ActiveNet software for registrations, which is the primary source of registrations. Montgomery County began collecting racial data on their registrations in September 2017. And we will collaborate with their staff for insights and lessons learned through their work. Education and awareness workshops are extremely important in creating the organizational culture that is fundamental to advancing racial equity. Therefore, we are working to create a framework for these workshops, starting with leadership positions and then being launched for all staff. Analysis of data and the implementation of racial equity tools are vital to ensuring that people and communities of color are afforded the same opportunities as their white counterparts. This is the starting point. Throughout the rest of this cohort, we will be working to create a robust organizational infrastructure to prioritize the advancement of racial equity, so that the city can be a leader in the metropolitan Washington region. The racial equity team would like to thank you for the opportunity to represent the city in this cohort. We are dedicated and working earnestly for the advancement of racial equity. This concludes our presentation, and we welcome any comments and questions you may have.
Thank you all very much. So I guess the first question is, how long have you guys been working on this? Did we get that at the beginning?
Yes.
When did you start?
Began September of 2019.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's sort of going to be an ongoing process, but essentially the goal here is to make sure that, or take steps to make sure that our services that we provide, the way that we're serving the community, is balanced. We're achieving it through our service. We're making sure that all of our communities in the city are as served as they can be. That's our goal here.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, what we're learning is how to look at things through the racial equity lens.
Mm-hmm.
That's where data is going to drive some of our decisions later on, so that we can identify barriers that may not be self-evident without the data, but looking at it through the racial equity lens, and then we can implement strategies that focus on outcomes.
Right. So we could be more proactive about
Yes.
it. Okay. Appreciate it. This sounds great. Who'd like to go next?
I'm glad to see that we're doing this. Some of us have been talking about this for a while, but I think, the whole using this lens to look at our community and looking at where the disparities are and how we address those disparities and try and reduce them is going to be part of every decision we make as a council in terms of providing services, dealing with housing issues, even things like traffic and transportation. and code enforcement. So I think this is a great place to start. I know a number of other cities are working on this through the National League of Cities LEAD program. So I think we have a great opportunity here, and we can take advantage of both the diversity and the talent of people who live in the city. So,
Lorianne.
Oh, thank you, sir. Well, thank you for the presentation. I remember bringing this to Tony last year in March and sharing this opportunity with him after leaving a Chesapeake Bay policy committee spearheaded by the Council of Governments. And so to see how it's developed and to see the engagement from the staff, and I'm glad that you guys are so invested, and I look forward to hearing what you're learning and you teaching us how we can better apply this racial equity lens and be more inclusive to not only internally for our staff, but as we make decisions that affect our community as a whole. So thank you to everyone who's participating, and I look forward to hearing how we can use this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan.
Well, I agree with what's been said. I want to thank Lorianne for bringing this Council of Governments program to the attention of the city and to Tony, and I want to commend our city manager for embracing it and making sure that city staff participated. And Mike is right, a number of us have been thinking about and talking about this issue in general terms for some years, but it's an issue that really requires us to have the right tools and methods to ensure that we're internalizing it in what we do as a city and as a city government. And it starts with education and training of our staff and our leadership. And so this is such a crucial, major first step in the process. And I'm really glad to see all of you, as Lorianne said, obviously invested and passionate about this important issue, and looking forward to seeing how it's going to manifest in our policy making in the coming months and years. So thank you.
Yeah, just, I've been kind of struggling over the last few years with trying to figure out how to engage with the many diverse communities that we have in the city. Typically at city council meetings, we see a group that looks very different than the pie chart that you had in terms of the different makeup of the city. And it's a critical piece for the future of our city and our residents that the new people moving in and the underserved communities have a chance to experience the opportunities that exist in this country and this city and this county and so forth. So I'm really hoping to hear some magic solution or some methods for getting more engagement from the different groups that we don't see as often here and that we should see more from. So economic development, education, whatever it takes to give people that, the leg up and become, take advantage of the land of opportunity. So that's your mission.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is that all?
We don't ask for much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Next, we have an update on an AT&T proposed monopole, telecommunications monopole off of Great Seneca Highway. And I'm assuming that you guys are here from AT&T.
That is correct.
Okay.
Would you like us to
Please, come on, sit down. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm Greg Rapisarda. I'm with the law firm Solu in Ernst & Young, and I'm here on behalf of New Singular Wireless, which we'll call AT&T, and that's the parent company. As you know, AT&T has a need for coverage. They need to add and improve services. We were here back in July. There's a piece of city-owned property that would be perfect for a monopole. There are no co-location opportunities in the area. I'm going to get into we're going to walk through all of those. There are no co-location opportunities. And frankly, there are no other properties where a monopole could go that AT&T could meet their need for coverage. We have,
Can I ask you to speak up just a little? Just
Sure.
want to make sure everyone in the back can hear everything.
Sure. So when we were here in July, there were folks in opposition to it. We're proposing putting a monopole onto a city-owned property off of Great Seneca Highway. And at the time, I think the closest house was less than 200 feet. And there was a serious question about, could you push and move this? And so we went back. We can't find another property for it, but we did slide it north 300 feet. Closest house is close to 500 feet away now. It's in a mature wood forest, and that's what we are proposing. Another big concern was the visual impact, and so in between July, actually back in October, and we have a PowerPoint that I'll walk you through, and we have our team members here. We put a balloon up to a large red balloon to 160 feet, took photos, then where it was visible, we made what they call a photo simulation, and that gives us a good idea of the visual impact. So we could pull up the PowerPoint, and then I can introduce you to the team members and they can speak to different aspects of it.
Is the PowerPoint on the screen in
It has
front
to
of
be
you?
on your computer first.
Oh, it has to be here? Okay. I got it, man.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and you can run.
Sure. And I need to switch it from the slide view. All right, well, that works. You can see the side. Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Yes.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
There it is. Put it on
Although
slide
you
view.
do, yeah.
And good.
Yeah,
There we go.
So we have with us tonight the AT&T team. I'll speak a little bit to the overview. We have Steve Hathaway, who is a radio frequency engineer with AT&T. Ryan Triller, who is a project manager and site acquisition specialist with SmartLink, who's doing the work for AT&T. And then we have Camille Shabshab, who's a licensed professional engineer with Entrex, and he's the engineer on the site. So why are we here? It's been a couple years now that, at least, that AT&T has had an active need for coverage in Gaithersburg. What we're trying to do is not only bring new services, but enhance the existing services and add FirstNet. So about a year ago, in the last year, AT&T won the national contract for the federal government to put FirstNet across the country. FirstNet is it's dedicated spectrum, licensed spectrum, that is dedicated for first responders. And so it operates, and I'm not going to get into the RF details of it, but it does operate on its own spectrum. And when first responders use it, they have that exclusive access, so they would never get bumped up. That whole process stemmed out of the 911, 9/11 commission report when they had problems in New York and people couldn't communicate because everyone was using their cell phones at the same time. So this is a dedicated network. It's already up around Maryland, being built out around Maryland and the country, but we would put it in this area as well. So, let's see. The needs. Actually, why don't I introduce Steve Hathaway and ask him to, if you can join us, Steve, and then, because the needs are listed here, increased cellular coverage. I think I actually hit those, though. Lakeland's neighborhood, Upshire, Muddy Branch Square, Washingtonian Woods Park, portions of Kentland's Market Square, Lakeland's Middle School, Montgomery County Police Station and Government Building, and then also with the FirstNet piece. Okay. We don't have, well, one thing we don't have is we didn't include the RF maps, which I do have a blow-up of those, and that may or may not be right to either show you or to show the people behind us. but this is AT&T's coverage in Gaithersburg right now. And that, I know that we can't see that on there, and I know technically nobody really asked us about the need. Everyone, I think, that came last time, even that didn't want it, most people said AT&T coverage is not good, so I don't know that that's a concern, but if it is, Mr. Hathaway can talk to it, and he can tell us about the height and what we need, what we're looking for here.
Yeah. Again, I'm Steve Hathaway. I'm an RF engineer with AT&T. These items come to me because people call. They call our trouble ticket center, and then the trouble tickets percolate to our office. And we have anywhere from 50 to 100 open trouble tickets in this area. And specifically, there's some. Where's Great Seneca Highway? Is this it? Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's a neighborhood to the south where a lot of these are concentrated, and then there's a neighborhood to the north where they're also concentrated. And then on this map, I'm not sure we have the exit ramp from, is it 200?
No, it's not on there.
Okay. That's another area where that general area is where we get a lot of complaints about drop calls or no data service or things like that. So we know that there's a problem there, and then as Greg showed on the map, we know we don't have any coverage in the area. The site, if we're able to put it in the map that's on the screen, there's like a light blue pentagon shape towards the center of the map. That's a property where we'd like to put the tower. If we're able to put a tower in that area, it's going to do a great deal to solve many of the trouble tickets and the problems that we're having and our customers are having. And again, most of the issues that get solved are in the neighborhood to the south, neighborhood to the north, and then also these intersections that are kind of to the east of that area.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Just to point out, it is that that's Pentagon, the light blue, and this map, in addition to being an aerial map, it basically is broken down. And Mr. Triller, who is sitting on the other end, Mr. Triller can talk. We call it an exhaustion map, but what it is it's a map where Mr. Triller, as the site acquisition specialist and as the project manager, looked at the existing structures or buildings or open land in all of these areas to determine whether there might be something that could work. And where we come down to is that centerpiece that is owned by the city. That is the property. It's undeveloped. It's heavily wooded, so it provides the screening. And with the right ground elevation or elevation above sea level, you can provide the coverage that we need. Originally, we were right across from, it's High Gables Drive, so it's really to the bottom, the south part of that light blue pentagon. Can you see it? Oh, okay.
There we go.
Oh, okay. So that's where originally we proposed it, and that's where it was about. That was where it was 100 and some, less than 200 feet to the homes on the south here, or to the south there. And so what we did was we went and we moved it up north about 300 feet, and the ground elevation dropped. So the ground elevation dropped 30 feet there. And I guess Steve can talk to that. So the goal would be to use the same, would be to propose monopole that would allow AT&T to put its antennas at 150 feet above the ground elevation. They'd get the same coverage, and you can talk to this, Steve, but it would have been at 150 feet at the original location, would have provided much better coverage. Well, because we're dropping it up, it drops off going back, or going to the north, correct?
Yeah. It's interesting just because you would think 30 feet doesn't cost you much. But in this case, dropping 30 feet of ground elevation and still only keeping the tower at 150 feet. It does impact us, and it impacts us mostly in this neighborhood here and down in this corner of the neighborhood here. And essentially what I do is when I run a coverage plot, I run it out to a certain level. And that level is, it's an indication that 85% of the time you'll be able to get adequate cell phone coverage inside a dwelling of some sort. If there's a hole in that coverage, it means that you're probably not going to get anything inside your home. If you want to get service from AT&T, you may have to step outside into the front yard, and even then it may not be as good as we would like it. And then the same thing happens here. So that's just a little more explanation of the coverage plots that we do.
So the next slide, thank you, Steve. And I don't know if there's any questions about that, but the next slide this is a summary, and I'm going to actually flip back to the map. Is Mr. Triller, that microphone's on, so you can talk there. Yep. That's all right. So this is the option and exhaustion summary. This actually relates to this map, and I think, unless you think differently, I think we should put it on the map and then have Mr. Triller explain the different areas and why they do or do not, why they can't work.
Agreed. Go right ahead.
Okay.
Sure. So just to start off here, as we mentioned, the light blue portion in the center, that's the proposed property for the tower. The black area just south of that, it actually would work, but unfortunately it's mostly wetlands. It has a large stream there. Really not conducive to building a tower in areas like that. Excuse me. As you can see, most of the properties are boxed with red, and the reason for that is because those are all residential areas, houses and such. Towers, of course, aren't permitted in those zones. The dark blue, it's actually the NIKE missile launch site. My understanding, it was a historic missile launch site, I believe, back in the 50s. So, historic properties like that typically wouldn't work for proposing a new tower. Excuse me. The purple area is the Muddy Branch Square Shopping Center, as we all know. Really, the buildings are not tall there. You could not put antennas on a roof that would support AT&T needs. In addition to that, it's mostly a parking lot, so you really wouldn't be able to propose any kind of raw land structure, such as a new monopole. The teal, the circle there, that's the location of an SBA tower. SBA is a tower company. It's a 100-foot tower. There's 2 carriers at the top, so the highest that AT&T would be able to go would be 80 feet. And of course, that actually would not support AT&T's needs in this area as well. The yellow property, as I'm sure we all know as well, is the NIST. It's a federal property. Their lawyers actually completely rejected any proposal and said that there was no possibility of them entertaining anything like that. The light green, which is the Montgomery County Police and government buildings. Of course, they're too far away from the center of the ring to work. In addition to that, the buildings are not tall, so they wouldn't be able to, like I said, support AT&T's needs. The dark green, bottom right, is the Bellward Farm. It's owned by Johns Hopkins University. Once again, the ground elevation is too low, and it's too far outside the center of the ring to support a new tower. The dark pink, small sliver there, is the Lakeland Parks Middle School. Once again, too far outside of the ring to support. The light pink, I believe it's just above it there, is that's the Kentlands areas, the shopping center areas. Once again, too far outside of the ring with no structures that are tall enough to support and no possibility of a raw land. And then finally, the orange property right next to it is the MedImmune property, and that is an existing AT&T facility. And of course, I think we talked about this last time. They put up a new parking garage which blocked one of the sectors. So yeah, of course, 2 reasons there why it wouldn't work.
Yeah. Can I interject a little something?
Sure.
When we're building a network, we have to look at it in its totality, and so we're looking for this particular site, but we have to fit it in amongst all the other sites. And so as they pointed out, we have a site up here, and it used to provide, pretty decent coverage along the Great Seneca Highway. With that parking lot, it blocked in this direction, okay? Even with that site, we had difficulty reaching down into these areas, and it's unfortunate. Then, in addition to that, off the map, we have another site that's back off in this area, and again, that one doesn't quite reach to where we need it to be. And so, when Ryan was talking about the properties that are lying outside the ring, what we do is we'll issue a point and say this is where we would like to place the tower, and if all things are perfect and everybody is amenable, that's where we're going to build the tower. And then we give them a little latitude and say, okay, we know that you're not going to be able to find that situation, so we'll allow you to look in an area, say a quarter of a mile from that center. And this is partly why this property fits the bill so well, is because it was very near the center of where we were looking, and it fit inside that quarter-mile ring.
Okay, so that's the city-owned property that is has the mature trees on it, right here along Great Seneca. So within this area, the only what we call an existing structure other than a 30 to 50 foot tall building is this SBA tower. But that is the one. That's the one that sits there. That is at capacity, and the lowest or the highest that AT&T could be would be 80 feet above the ground, and that would not cover. That would not meet their coverage needs, which is why we're proposing this.
Do you mind, could we just jump in with a couple of questions about the maps? Since you've got it up and having the cursor on the map is pretty helpful, maybe you all can answer some specific questions for us about where certain things are. So the SBA tower is that teal circle.
Yes.
Do we know what's to the right of that on the map, in between the yellow and the red? That's Isaac Walton Lee? Okay. And then, gentleman in the middle, I'm sorry, I forgot your last name.
I'm Steve.
Hathaway.
Steve Hathaway.
Hathaway, Mr. Hathaway. Yes. Or Steve, that's fine. You referenced at the beginning of your presentation that the majority of the tickets that you got for service issues were to the north and to the south of the light blue pentagon, what we're calling the light blue pentagon in the center of the. Could you sort of give us a better sense of where you mean when you say to the north and the south?
This general area here,
okay.
These homes here,
okay.
And then these homes right in here. I think there's some apartment buildings in this area.
Okay.
Yeah. Here, just give me the top one there.
Do you want me to hold it?
So this is the map.
Just point the microphone up to you, just so people will work.
So the areas that I was pointing out on the map are here, and that's represented by this circle here.
Yeah, just leave it right on the table because they're trying to get it on
camera.
Right where you had it. Where you had it before.
No, just where you had it, where you were pointing to it.
Bring it back to you so you can point to it, right?
There you go.
And just hold it in one place.
Here we go. Okay. Okay.
You gotta set up the top.
So this is the community to the south of Great Seneca Highway that I was talking about. Tickets are coming from the communities that are just to the north of Great Seneca Highway here. And then this is kind of the intersection that I was telling you about. It seems like a lot of tickets line up there. And this plot shows our current coverage, basically, with the site that we were discussing is, I think, off map up in this area.
Okay.
Okay,
So
that's helpful. Thank you.
does the green indicate where you have solid coverage and the white is where you have low coverage? Is that what
The
color
green
code
would
is?
indicate that you have an 85% chance of getting service inside your
Okay.
home.
Very good. We've got a nice zoom in.
All right, we got it.
Okay, sorry
Thank
about
you.
that.
I mean, not that you guys come to present to us all the time, but for you guys and for anybody else who does presentations, if you let us know in advance that you're going to have charts, we'll bring an easel. It'll make life easier for everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so do you want to switch with Camille? Did you have any other questions? Mr.
That's it
Spiegel?
for now. Thank you. I don't know if others might have.
Well, I did have a question, actually. So I'm still a little bit surprised about the issue with the existing tower on the AstraZeneca site. And I understand, I mean, it was very obvious to us, I live in the Kentlands, where suddenly reception on AT&T started becoming challenging pretty much right after that 7-story parking garage went up. And I saw a lot of reports on nextdoor.com, which I passed to the city, and I think that's part of what started this process. But I'm surprised that they would not help in this situation, because they're generally a really, really good neighbor in terms of allowing you to put another pole or a taller pole or something like that. I mean, how have those conversations gone?
We explored options. One of the options was to move the antennas that were pointing down the highway onto the parking ramp. And we have facilities that allow us to do that. The problem with that is it still wouldn't have solved the problem all the way down the street. I think it may have helped you in your neighborhood, but further down, it just still couldn't reach
So it still wasn't, even though the garage kind of started the problem in some areas, it wasn't really the cause of the problem in other areas, is what
Correct.
you're saying? Okay. All right, thank you. Oh, one other thing, that Nike missile site, the former Nike missile site, is for sale. The federal government has listed that for sale, so you might have use for it for some other, it's probably too expensive to just put a pole on, but AT&T has lots of stuff. Maybe you want to have your own facility there.
That would be very interesting.
Yeah, quick question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm looking at the map again, the purple site, I think it's Muddy Branch
This-
Shopping Center? Yes. Did you say you couldn't get any poles at the shopping center on any of the,
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Triller.
I mean, typically, dropping a pole in a parking lot is,
no, not in the parking lot, but can't put it on the rooftops
no,
or?
unfortunately, the buildings aren't tall enough there. They're 30 feet maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're, if that, I would think.
Yeah.
So you don't put a whole monopole on top of a building?
No.
No.
So in the middle of the field, it can go in the middle of the field, but it can't go on top of a structure already?
Correct. So the co-location, and they can talk about that, co-location is where it's a rooftop facility, so you basically have a structure that a ballast and then the antennas. But it has to still be high enough, and so with a monopole, what you do is you put the foundation in, you raise the vertical metal, the metal pole, and then that's your ballast, like a rooftop would be, and then you put the antennas around that.
And the structure that's already on Great Seneca Highway, you said that's already at capacity? Okay.
And that is AT&T's, I mean, they have agreements with all these tower companies and with other carriers too. If someone has a pole, a monopole up, then they have agreements where they can go on it. The problem here is that this is a very short one, and it already has 2 carriers on it, so then the next highest would be 80 feet, and that was not high enough to be able to.
Okay. And did I see something about an access road would have to be created?
Yes. So, you want to switch with Camille? Right, that's a good. So this is just a summary of what Mr. Triller had said. And we included this is Mr. Camille Shabshab with Entrex. Maybe you could tell them a little bit about this letter in the next slide.
Sure. The letter is basically stating that...
Probably move up some.
I'm sorry. The letter is just stating that the fall radius will be within the setbacks, within the property. The poles can be designed to basically fail at a certain point, so it doesn't, if in the very unlikely scenario that there's, say, a frequent or something, but it doesn't fall outside the property. So this letter is certifying that the fall zone is 130 feet, which is well within the property boundaries and the setbacks.
This also talks about the engineering specs, that it would be designed.
Yeah, the standards, the
Those are
applicable
the standards that are
right.
for all monopoles,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
I'm just wondering how many trees we'll lose to make this clearing for this access road. Do you have a visual for that, a before and after?
Not yet. We haven't really done a detailed survey of that part, of this particular area. I mean, that's kind of pending the approval. But there is a clear path down most of that road. I mean, most of what's going to be lost with the access road is really like saplings, 2 and 3 inch diameter trees.
I'd like to see a visual of what you anticipate removing and what's there now, because we've seen how the trees look during the summer months or the spring when they're in full bloom, and then when, during the winter months, it looks a little sparse, and so I just want to see what the potential loss is going to be for that.
Yeah, I mean, that will be done at a later point in this process.
Could we
I don't know if
look
you
at?
could do like
We could,
like
and we could look at doing
a
it too.
rendering of what it could look like, or other places. Yeah.
Right, if it
there-
wasn't, even if it wasn't an exact survey, having photos and being able to generally say, we think this would be 15 or
about
sapling, or
how
whatever
much
it
the
would
loss,
be. Right.
Exactly. That would be helpful.
Now, that's something that we can certainly follow up for, or follow up with.
And our reforestation
Yes.
law would
To
require that whatever they have to remove has to be replaced somewhere else.
It's just I know how close that site is to other communities, and I don't know what the visibility will be once that clearing happens, and how long it takes for those trees to, regrow,
It's a fair
fill
point.
out.
And I would just, the only thing I would add to that is that this whole area is wooded. This whole lot, this large 13-acre lot is mostly wooded.
Yeah.
And so, if you look, here is the, what? Okay. I don't want to move it to, but if you can see here across from High Gables Drive, if I move that to do the cursor, it switches it. So High Gables Drive, if you look, see where it says existing gate. So there's an existing gate onto the city-owned property there.
You can't use the cursor because it's going to
Lower right corner where it says existing gate in the middle of the road.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's a driveway there.
Right there, if you can see the cursor.
Okay.
Okay? So there's an existing gate and drive, is that a driveway there?
Yeah,
And
there's a little bit of a driveway and curves, and it kind of disappears. The gravel is not longer a driveway, but there's a clear path in between the trees that's going downhill, basically. So along almost the entire driveway, there's hardly anything to be cleared.
Okay. It would be nice to see what hardly anything looks like, and when those pictures were taken.
So originally in July, the proposal was here. That was where it was. And that was, so now it's up here, and as you can tell, or as Camille said, it goes downhill here. That's about 30 feet difference in ground elevation there. And then this would be a 30 by 50 area to be cleared. And do you know what that area is like?
It has some trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be where
There's
it would be
some
surrounded
clearing
by a
back there,
fenced compound.
Right. Right.
So what's the diameter of that area
That
where you'd have to
clearing,
put the hardware, basically?
30 by 50.
30 by 50
So
feet.
that's probably 10 trees or something that have to come down, right? So, I think, the biggest concerns that we expressed, and certainly members of the community, was the visual blight that an antenna like this causes from, their front door, back door, bedroom window, etc. So you didn't have a balloon test at that point.
Well,
You could show us. So
we did. Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of people are waiting to see. So can we?
Sure.
All right. So that is the big thing. And we didn't take any photos from anyone's bedrooms or second floor. But Camille did go out and Trex was hired. And why don't you tell them what you did with the balloon and what this test is, and then we'll go to the next visual impact survey.
Sure. So we did here what is done on all of these sites, basically. You have a helium balloon, put it up at the proposed tower location. And this particular one, we put it up to the string on that balloon is 160 feet plus the balloon, which is about 5 feet. So the top of the balloon is roughly 165 feet. And then basically we put it up, and then Ryan went around, spent about 3 or 4 hours going around the neighborhood trying to figure out where it's visible from. And the following photographs will show it's actually not very visible.
Well, so this shows, this is really kind of proof of the balloon test that you could see it there, right? And that was on this balloon. What time did you go out in the morning? It was up all day. Do you remember what time you started in the morning?
It was 11, I believe it was 11 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay.
But you didn't account for the 30 by 50 feet of tree removal around.
So the 30 by 50 feet tree removal will be 130 feet or 125 feet back in from Great Seneca Highway.
So you couldn't see
we
that
could take pictures
right.
from there, right? That's probably unlikely that you would see the clearing 130 feet back.
Okay.
When there are trees on the other side of that 130 feet too, you know what I mean? So that
I'm just
that
wondering
clearing,
where around that balloon, how much trees would be cleared and how much more visible the pole would be if less trees were there.
It wouldn't be any more visible. I mean, the trees are only about 90 to 100 feet there. So, I mean, the balloon is 60 feet above the trees. So, it's not going to create more visibility. Plus the fact that there's trees between the tower site and the road. So, you're not going to have a direct line of sight to the tower from anywhere.
So what we found, and Ryan, Mr. Triller drove all these roads, and he took 35, maybe more, 35 photos from different locations. There were 3 areas. Everything you see on this map, he drove and looked for the large red balloon at 160 feet above ground elevation. Mr. Shabshab stayed with the balloon the whole time. Sometimes they pop, then you have to put it on. So he was with the balloon the whole time. Mr. Triller drove around. This is what we call a visual impact survey. These 3 photos, and we're going to show you, we're not going to walk you through all 35, were the only locations where you would be able to view this, where you would be able to see this from.
So what do the numbers signify? Is that just a numbered site?
Just a number of where the location or where the photo was taken from.
Okay.
So here's photo 6. This is what we consider a visible site. From across the street, across Great Seneca Highway, and you can see the balloon on the lower left-hand side. You can see the photograph with the actual balloon above the trees. And then to the right, the larger one, which is proposed as a photo simulation that actually has the antennas superimposed or photoshopped, however you want to do that. They're scaled, whatever you want to refer to that as, but they are scaled and placed in there. That's photo 6. That is a visible shot. Photo 7, again, right across the street, right on the other side of Great Seneca Highway. In the lower left, you can see the balloon, and to the right, you can see the full antenna array. And that antenna array, the center of that is at about 150 feet. That's what they do. They measure things by the ground elevation and the center line of the antenna.
Can we say that the trees that we're looking at?
I'm going to need you to speak into the microphone.
I was just going to point out that the trees you see in that photograph, those will not be taken down to put the tower up. So, you know, effectively, this is what it's going to look like even after we take trees down to put the monopole in place.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the 3rd visible shot. And again, this is right across the street. It's deeper back into the residential neighborhood to the east. And what you can see is And frankly, as you're driving down that road, you could miss that. But that's why it took them 4 hours to go around and take these shots. Because you try to find the balloon and then take a shot of it. This is the third one. So of 35 locations around this entire map, it will be visible really within 500, 600, 700 feet. That might be 800 feet there. So the where number 8 is. Those are the only locations it's visible. And this is, I mean, then we have a bunch in here where I think these are key areas that people express concern about. And it was, well, we're going to be able to see it. Well, so here's 14. This is Suffield Lane. So 14 is just to the south, southeast. This is 14. And so when you drive on Suffield Lane and go to there, this is what you see. Couldn't find it anywhere. And frankly, part of the reason is that even these trees that might only be 30 feet tall, when you're right in front of them and there are homes or houses, and because of that's going to be the screening. You're never actually going to like levitate up high enough over the trees to be able to see a 150-foot tower. So that's 14, that's Suffield Lane. We put a couple other, Upshire Circle, 16. I could flip back if it doesn't give everybody a headache. There we go, 16. This is directly to the south, and you can't see it. These are the two, Upshire Circle to the south. So what you can see there is you're not going to find that, you're not going to see that tower anywhere from back there because these trees are going to block it, and these trees aren't even close to even the 90 feet that are around. And there's 18 and 19.
Could you go back to 18, please?
Huh. That is easier, thank you. All right, so on the map, so this is 18. 18 is to the west, little southwest if you look at the on the map. 17 is directly to the south. 18. 19, Gatestone Square Street. That is almost directly west, a little bit north, a little northwest, but mostly west in the Lakelands. 20, Stone Mason Drive. Looking at this, this is, I thought it was Lakelands as well.
It is. It's like southern Lakelands.
Oh, it is, yeah. Closer up southern Lakeland.
All right, so I think we get the point. We can see, if you want to just cycle so that the public can see the rest of the images, there's only a few more, and in the images, the balloon is not visible.
And that is it. So we have 35 photos. We have a full package. We'd be happy to share any of those as well. But the bottom line is that we were able to, this is the only available property if the city will agree to it. We can put it in there without visual impact to the surrounding communities. Even 6, 7, and 8, I think that's minimal. We didn't raise the height of it. So we did not lose because we never had it. But when we were here in July, we were at 100, we were proposing 150 feet above ground elevation, and we were 30 feet higher. We didn't want to come back and do that, but frankly, 180 feet would be preferable. I don't feel like that's the right way to push it, where it's almost twice as tall as that. And so we think we can put this in. It will fill most of the gaps in coverage. It'll add FirstNet for first responders network, and be able to solve those problems. That's it. Appreciate it, and we're here if you have any questions, and try to answer them.
Great. So this is what I'd like to do. I want to give the council a chance to ask any further questions. Tony, I know, had mentioned while you guys are doing the balloon test, he drove around personally to look at it, if he wants to say anything. Then, next we have on our agenda is public comments, and for anybody who's here to give us comments on this, I'd like invite them to come first while you guys are still here, and then we can come back to the council, and then we'll go to further public comments. So, council first. What do you guys got?
Well, I'd like to ask a couple more questions before we have any discussion about this, but if we could bring up the visual impact survey map with all the numbers on it, just as a reference point. And while you're bringing that up, yeah, that's the one. I just want to ask if you all could let us know what exactly is the distance from the proposed facility to the closest houses in what would be number 17 on the map to the south.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said 700 feet.
So on this, we show 491 feet from the monopole to
the back of that lot.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And what about in the neighborhood to the west of the proposed location? I didn't.
So over here.
Like, so where number 18 is. So where number 18 is, for example.
715 feet approximately. On that same.
That's on there?
Yeah, it's on there.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to the west, 715 feet.
Well, that's the setback to the property line.
Right.
So that's not to the house.
Right,
okay.
right.
Okay. So it's 715 feet
To the one that's immediately west, but aren't there houses that are closer to the sort of the southwest? Or am I reading the map wrong? In other words, it looks like you drew sort of
right there.
A precisely western line to measure the nearest
18.
property line. But I'm trying to figure out, are there properties that are closer that aren't directly on that western line that might be to the southwest?
Yeah, we can figure that out. It's not.
It's
okay.
18.
Right. I'm curious about that.
Right.
All right.
I mean, it's more than the one to the south, which is the 400.
It's more than the one to the south, which you said was
492.
492.
Right.
Okay. And then the other question I had, I mean, we talked a lot about foliage covering the visual of the proposed tower, but your survey with the balloon test was done in October, right?
October 9th.
Yes. So, do we have any sense as to whether the trees that are blocking some of that view are evergreens or not evergreens, and what that might mean for winter weather when we lose the leaves? I mean, I don't want to get too nitpicky here, but I need to understand, what the real impact is. I don't know if anybody has any comment on that, or if something we can look at.
We do them when we got to do them. I mean, we've done them without. Certainly, we do balloon tests in the winter all the time.
Yeah.
There can be a slight difference. It's typically not much because you're talking about hundreds of feet of wooded areas. So all of that filling in your vision is actually what blocks it. It's not necessarily the leaves, it's all the branches that are holding the leaves. But it can be slightly different at the top.
Okay. Anyone else from the council? Tony, did you want to add anything?
I made a bunch of notes, but as you mentioned, Tom Lonergan and I did drive around during the balloon test and can confirm, it was difficult to find. And I imagine even in winter, the visibility of this tower, you'd have to look through hundreds of feet of tree trunks to see the base of it. Obviously interested in the public comments. Interestingly, this tower is hundreds of feet from other residential properties, much farther than other installations in the city. As I mentioned before, including where we're sitting, there's one a couple hundred feet from here, literally on top of a residential tower. So just to keep it in perspective, this is not a new precedent for proximity to residents. It's actually quite a bit further than some of our other installations.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to people from the public who'd like to speak on this topic. Come on up, please. We ask that you keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes. When your time's down to 30 seconds left, the timer will beep and turn yellow. When time's up, it'll beep and turn red. Please state your name and address or neighborhood for the record. Go right ahead.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm a 23-year...
Let's start with your name and address.
Craig Culp, 23-year resident of Washingtonian Woods, which is nestled right up against this fine riparian wooded area along Muddy Branch Creek. I don't know anything about trouble tickets or exhaustion maps, but...
Address us, thank you.
Yes, I've raised 2 boys in those woods, so I know about trouble and exhaustion. And I'll tell you, those woods mean everything to our community. I think the red balloon is a bit of a red herring because we're not just talking about this little speck in the sky, we're talking about a footprint in those woods that is larger than the size of this room, with a fence, with gravel road, with generators, steel. And I like 4 bars. I'm like everybody else, I like 4 bars. But 1 bar is not going to materially change my life. I may not be able to get perfect coverage in my basement, but I'm willing to give that up to preserve something that is vanishing in Gaithersburg, and that's open space. You can go into those woods right now and it's like the wilderness. It's really extraordinary. What will be materially affected by this tower is the sense of being out there in the woods, in the wilderness. It'll affect the pileated woodpeckers, the coyote, the fox, the barred owls. There will be tremendous impacts on that riparian area with this tower. It's not just about visuals and pretty pictures. It's not just about whether you have perfect coverage in your home at all times. It's about something that is truly vanishing in our community of Gaithersburg City, and that is open spaces. I now love to go to Coastal Flats, but it was a beautiful open farm for many years. I miss it. I like Coastal Flats. You know, we're going to lose the farm Bellward. It's going to be developed. I mountain biked in what is now the Lakelands, when it was just open woods behind what used to be National Geographic. Gone. You know, I love the communities. It's great. We've done good things there. But this is an extraordinary piece of property that runs from Great Seneca to the Potomac. I mountain bike on it. I encourage you to get out there, walk around. It is really, really gorgeous. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Sanders Levy. For 3 years, I've been a co-property owner at 927 Lynn Slade Close in the Lakelands community. As a reference on the map with the box numbers that we were looking at, we are in box number 18, just around where the 8 is, and we are on the property line with the Muddy Branch Woods. I sit in my kitchen, I sit on my patio and my porch, and all day and all evening, I see young, old, people walking, running, biking on the path into the woods with children, with dogs. I see kids going in to explore. And I read about what Muddy Branch is. And by the way, this is where the Muddy Branch Trail, part of the entire Montgomery County Trail Network, is located. We're not talking about a vast bunch of trees. This is a purposeful designation of a public space to enjoy public space. The photo that was taken, number 18, I think it was, is at the front of Lynn Slade Close. And so what you see are the front of the houses that back to the woods into which this tower is, placement is proposed. There are no pictures showing the impact between our backyards and the natural barrier between us and Great Seneca Highway. That's what's going to be impacted, this barrier. The 10-foot road is 130 square feet if it's 300 square feet if it's 30 feet long, 10-foot wide road, plus the 150 square feet with the fence. This is taking a lot of ground cover out that is the natural barrier and was intended to be a natural barrier for the woods, for the hiking, and for the residents. So I would ask that more questions be asked of alternate sites, possibly 2 towers, splitting the necessary coverage, because I've heard of other options that may have not been perfect, but there seem to be some other steps that might be taken on AT&T's point. I would also be curious, since it's lowland and it is wetland, what base is needed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Lisa Klein. I'm going to go on script because I don't do this very well. So if I don't look at you, it's nothing personal. I was here in July. 420 Upshire Circle is where we live. And I think we're probably pretty close to the site amongst all the other people in the room tonight. So all of my concerns from July are STEP. They still apply. They were kind of more mechanical in nature, and I'm going to go a different direction tonight and talk about 2 different things. The balloon test, first of all. It's a big red birthday balloon on a string, which doesn't really replicate the visual impact of the 160-foot tower. And anything that would be beneath it, the lights that would be on top of it, the leaves being off the trees. I sent you all in your packet, and this is my picture of the birthday balloon. It's similar, but I do see more of the balloon than in AT&T's photos. So in your packet, I did send you some pictures of the leaves off the trees, and as you can see, it's quite different. This is about 6 months out of the year that it's going to look like this. This is actually in the woods. This is from our front door through that kind of passageway. So I really do beg to differ. The visual impact will be quite different in the wintertime. I'm next going to talk about the perspective inside the woods. And I want you to see how we see these woods. Where AT&T sees an opportunity to build out its network, residents see an extension of our neighborhood, an escape, a playground, a park. As you'll see in the pictures, if you take a minute with them, on any day of the week, you'll see hikers, dog walkers, mountain bikers, and explorers of all ages. The neighborhood kids just completed a hand-built bike track. They did it by hand. There's jumps. It's fantastic. They call it the pump track. Action shot. And then this is looking in the woods back up towards where the tower will be. When the leaves are off the trees, you can see it's quite different. And it will be a threatening kind of thing to see through these trees. I also want you to know about what we call the beach. This has become a real destination in the woods, and this is very close to where the tower would be. It's a sandy stream bed that the kids found, and it's remarkable. Wear your boots if you go check it out, because it's wet, but it's fantastic. So, long story short, the city of the tree, which is our logo, should not promote destroying forest land and replacing it with industrial complexes that pollute, not just visually, but audibly. I just have a hard time believing there's not a more suitable location for this. And for the record, I'm an AT&T customer. I have very good service. And also for the record, as you know, there's a small cell tower already near our home.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Gail Isaacson. Thank you for the time. I'm also Washingtonian Woods, and I'll basically echo what my neighbor said. The woods are a beautiful spot for walking, and it would be a shame to have a big tower when we need woods. Also, we need to think about the health effects on the animal life and the people nearby, and it would just be a shame to ruin that beautiful area that we need so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, council members. I'm Jack Klein from 420 Upshire Circle. I have two comments to share. I like to associate myself with my neighbors in terms of their comments. The two things that I'd like to share with you is that I and my family and my neighbors use this space regularly. I've seen some of you back there walking the Muddy Branch Trail. I know this is enjoyed by many. The second point that I like to make, and I thought it was striking, in the AT&T presentation, the one picture that they didn't show was what the platform looks like. They have dozens of these around the country, probably all over the state. Why didn't they show a picture? You know why? Because it is massive. I've seen them. And it's not something you want to put up there on the screen. This is not a simple pole with a cute balloon that's up there right now to show it as an example. This is going to be a monstrosity when we go back there with our families. And so I'd like for you to keep that in mind when you consider this. I strongly urge you to oppose this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Nick McGowan. I live at 935 Lindslade Close. I back to the woods. It's beautiful. I'd like to continue where the last gentleman left off. What will be the height and the diameter of the platforms in the structure?
Please address
on top
us,
of the
please.
tower? And not just AT&T's, but the future
Ned,
to come also.
I'd like you to address us, please.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to request that another balloon test be done while there are no leaves on the trees. And could we request a notified letter to the city certifying the length of the cord on the balloon, that it is 160 feet, and any other critical parameters such as ground elevation at the location. And that's the extent of my comments, except that let's not mess up a beautiful space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, City Council, I'm Jared Borkat, 929 Lindslade Close. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity for all of us to share our perspectives. I will keep it short, but wanted to follow up on Ned's comments. If the Mayor and City Council consider this, which I would urge you not to and hope that you don't, I would ask not only for there to be another balloon test, but not one that is not well publicized and only for a very short duration. It would be really interesting to see a balloon for 2 straight days and then to have an email to which people could send pictures that they take. I'd be interested to see what those pictures look like and how those would compare to the ones we saw tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Please, come on up.
My name is Michael Levy. I live at 927 Lindslade Close. We're next to Jared and Ned and in the same house as this beautiful woman right there. I'd like to know about the noise that's going to come from this structure, whether there's any humming that's going to come, because when it moved from the first location to the second, it's basically a straight shot from our house. And so noise, is it constant? Is there a hum? How often do generators come on? What kind of noise is that going to make? How is that going to impact us in the middle of the night or the early evening? And also, what types of environmental effects are there going to be from runoff? Again, we're clearing a 30 by 50 feet swatch. All of that is stuff that's governing water and rain runoff right now. I'd like to see where that water and runoff is going to go to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Jed Thompson, 939 Lindslade Close. 2 comments. One was, when we got the letter that they were going to do a balloon test, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it almost made me laugh because you could tell they were just trying to get it done before those darn leaves fell off. And they succeeded, as we saw in the pictures today. So that was one. And two, I kind of want to appeal to the council. I think last time we heard, or somewhere we heard, that this property was provided to the county somehow from developers. If that's the case, I suspect when the developers handed it over to the county, there was a certain trust that the developer decided not to make money off of it, decided not to sell the property, decided not to develop the property, and they got to the city, and there was a certain level of trust that the city would protect it, keep it the way it is, and allow us to enjoy it the way the community just talked about. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Come on up.
Hello, I'm Maxwell, 419 Danvers Street. I just have, I guess, a rhetorical question. I'm listening to all this and I'm trying to figure out what exactly has changed since the last time we were here, and I don't think anything has. Reading from the website, you all voted unanimously to shoot this down, citing the lack of information showing a real need for the tower at the proposed location. So we've had a couple of tickets about some people who have bad cell reception. I explained that I have Wi-Fi calling, and I even have an M cell that AT&T gratuitously sold to me. No problem whatsoever. Can I text as I approach my house in the entrance to Lakelands? Probably not, but that's against the law anyway, so I shouldn't be doing that. Is there some emergency phone call that I need to have as I'm approaching my house that can't wait till I get to my house where I have reception? No, because I'm going to be at my house in 30 seconds. So nothing has changed there. You told them, go find an alternate location. This is completely inappropriate. What has changed? There's no alternate location here. We're 300 feet deeper into an area where this should clearly not be. So nothing's changed there. And the visual impact, Council Member Sedma, I think you were very sensitive to this last time. Any of you, just go out there right now. Go out the exit to Lakelands Drive toward Great Seneca. You don't have to get halfway down it. You can see the bridge. You can see straight through there. It's really remarkable what difference there is now versus then. So this thing is just going to stick out like a sore thumb, balloon or no balloon. I think nothing has changed. It was unanimous last time, and we're here again regurgitating the same thing all over again, only this time with a balloon. My house hasn't moved. This cell tower is the same cell tower we proposed before. It's just 300 feet further in where it should not be. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Not seeing any. Okay, we will come back. We'll come back to the rest of the public comments. I just want to finish this. So, questions about noise, questions about design, questions about runoff. Do you guys want to address some of that?
Sure. I took some notes too. Let's see. So it's 30 by 50 space footprint in the woods. That is on this, what you can see, and you can look at the aerial on that. That's shown on the site plan that it would be 50 by 30. There was a question about lights. There are no lights on this pole. There are no lights proposed on it. Maybe I should have said that, but typically when it's under 200 feet, unless you're right next to an airport, and we will not need lighting on this pole. Noise. Somebody mentioned audible pollution or noise pollution. There is a generator proposed for this, and we did not put all of the drawings in it, although we certainly can share any of our lease exhibit, the drawings that would go with that, which would show that we would propose an emergency generator here. Those generators start up, I mean, I think it could fluctuate a little bit, but it's about 15 minutes every 2 weeks. They're running an emergency. People turn lawnmowers on all the time, hundreds, thousands of feet away. You don't hear them. They're, other than the generator that will turn on for 15 minutes every prescribed certain period of time, just to prime, okay, like just to prime the fuel in it. That's it. Otherwise, it's only on an emergency. Like, if that was that type of emergency, probably have generators in houses as well, or around houses that would be on. Typically, they are under, and I don't know, they're under a certain decibel level that is, it's pretty low. I mean, depending on what it would be, I mean, I've seen them at 30, 33 decibels, which those are not very loud. They're actually quieter than some of those portable ones that you can get for your house. But anyway, there would be a generator associated with it. It would go on in the. Other than that, there's no noise. There's no humming. There are no lights. Let's see. Oh, and we do have. I mean, we didn't put it in here because it's usually the part that. But basically, if you look at a 30 by 50 area, and they have AT&T's equipment would fit into a
10 by 20.
But it's not even 10 by 20. It's I was just.
8 by 16.
It's 8 by 16. Okay, so that I mean.
So the
that's
actual
what you're
footprint, not the whole plot, but the actual footprint of the equipment is 8 by 16?
Mm-hmm.
For AT&T, correct.
For AT&T, and then obviously you would want to have a spot within that 30 by 50 fenced area that another carrier could come along and put that on. But yeah, 8 by
16.
8 by 16 for just AT&T's equipment.
And that would be fenced. What would be the
8-foot tall fence?
The 30 by 50 is the fence.
The 30 by 50 fence, okay.
Also locked, of course.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right, so Tony, you're looking for guidance tonight on this.
Could I ask another question?
Please.
So, you talked about the SBA tower.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I didn't even realize it was there, but I did look at a Google map and found it on the map. It's close to your circle there. Is that part of the FirstNet network?
No.
Is there a reason why?
Because AT&T isn't on it. AT&T is FirstNet, so AT&T is doing the FirstNet network, and so they put their FirstNet antennas where they can have sites. It goes with their sites.
Okay.
It's just another spectrum, I think.
And how tall? What's the height of that tower?
100 feet.
100 feet. Okay, so they have space below, which
80,
would put it at 80.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What's the dimensions of the antennas on that's proposed for the site? Because I mean, we're looking at a balloon. You didn't tell us what the diameter was. I assume it was 5 feet.
Yeah.
About that.
Okay, so I don't believe that the antenna. I believe the antenna is probably a 10-foot diameter. Is that close?
The antennas are 8 feet tall by about 19 inches wide each.
But they're all
but there's a cluster of them.
That's exactly
the cluster
right.
is
Right.
about,
So,
yeah, 12
so
feet.
what's the
12 feet.
dimensions of the antenna cluster?
12 feet on side. Each side
12
of the
feet
triangle
all
is 12
around.
feet. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where you go right here and see, that's the antenna cluster. That is the 12 feet by 12 feet by 12 feet triangle. So
Okay. All right. All right, those are.
How high is it?
160 feet.
No, just the structure.
Okay, so
Can I just say, we've had
sorry.
public comments on this. We're not going to tolerate disruptions of the meeting. This
So
is an
if
actual.
So if another carrier came by, wanted space on that tower, they would be below the 150-foot
That is correct.
level. But again, it would be another 12 by 12 by 12 cluster.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
AT&T's center line of their antennas would be at 150 feet. It would be a 155-foot monopole and then a 5-foot lightning rod for a total of 160.
Anybody else have questions or comments? Tony, you're looking for guidance tonight?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I am.
What is the pleasure of the council?
Well, I mean, if you want any, again, just to emphasize, obviously, this is public property. We're under no obligation to approve this. You know, we've had many meetings with AT&T. We've pointed out, you know, that particular circumstance. Yes, it is a wooded parcel. Public property is not necessarily only for wooded recreation or whatever you want to call that. Sometimes it's for storing salt. Sometimes it's for doing other things. I'm not sure that the public won't still get to walk around in these woods if you decide to approve this. but you're under no obligation to do so. I think the main point that I was trying to make before is that this is actually considerably farther than other facilities that we've approved. I recall that we approved one at Lakelands Park, right in the middle of it. You know, again, did not get built, but much closer to residences than this particular one was. And then, you know, there's the issue of FirstNet, which I do think that, you know, we're kind of on the record as supporting other types of public emergency communications. We wrote a letter to the governor recently, I believe, on a similar note. So staff believes this can be done, you know, sensitively, and that the visual impact will be minimal. I certainly understand the neighborhood concerns because we get it whenever we try to do one of these projects, and sometimes they have been approved and other times they have not. So we would just like to get some closure, so that we don't have to have AT&T come back and present again. But also, you know, it just seems unfair to just keep having it move along.
I did have a question. How often do these towers need servicing on average?
Rare. They're mostly monitored remotely.
Okay.
Like Brian said, but it's a locked facility, but typically we would say that maybe there's one technician that could come visit it per quarter.
Okay.
And that's in a regular size SUV or pickup truck. That's not in some type of heavy truck, because even then they're using their laptop if they need to do something to get into the actual compound.
Okay.
Yeah, the only other thing I was just going to throw in, it doesn't really tie to that, but there were concerns about environmental concerns. All of that happens. Every tower, like if you were to say that we should go forward on this, we still have to file something under the NEPA, which is and then we get feedback from all tribes, the State Historic Preservation Officer. This isn't the end all right here. If there's pushback or some type of environmental concern, somebody mentioned a woodpecker of some kind. That's all part of the NEPA process, which is a federal process that's done outside of this procedure.
Okay. Thank you.
This is a tough one. I can see some hesitance on the part of the council. I mean, what Tony says is correct. We like to have all of our neighborhoods have service. At the same time, we have, you know, preserving our environment, our green space, our recreational areas is a priority. Council members, you want to? I mean, we could potentially defer and have this vote at a near future meeting if you guys want to think about it a little bit more.
Are you able to provide the pictures of what that 30 by 50 feet clearing would look like? I don't know if you could do like the
Probably get an
ribbons
aerial.
around the trees around that area, just so we could see what the potential loss would be.
To see if it could be visible from Great
Exactly.
Seneca? Okay.
Yeah. Just on the ground level.
So, you know, initially when I asked about the visibility of the balloon from various sites, I did make the comment about visibility from a bedroom window. And a lot of bedrooms face on the back of the house. They face the back of the property. So I wasn't trying to be funny. I was trying to be realistic about what a resident is actually going to see when you put something like that up. So, I mean, all of your photos are from the street. There's homes in front, there's foliage. So, and we've heard comments from people whose property backs up to the forested areas or the preserved areas or the park areas from, you know, a couple different neighborhoods now. And I think that's certainly something that I think we have to pay attention to, and certainly what people enjoy about living close to that. But I think, you know, so I guess I'm not completely satisfied with all the information that's been provided. So that's where I am now.
Well,
I'm not real enthusiastic at this point.
Right.
Aside from the well-articulated concerns of the community, and the issues which I was glad to see the community come out and testify, not just that this is an issue about the visibility of the tower, but they said better than I could that this was something I was going to start to say, but I wanted to wait to hear from the public that there are other issues of concern here about the quality of the of what one member of the community testified as the riparian area, the nature value and the harm that the disturbance will cause. But setting that aside, we make tough decisions to balance interests for the community all the time, and they can be difficult, but we can make those decisions if we feel like whatever it is we're sacrificing is worth the benefit that we're getting. And my big concern here is that I have yet to hear anyone really persuade me of the business case for the need for this facility. I haven't really heard virtually anything from anyone in the community about the desperate need for improved service, quite honestly. And I don't have any reason to doubt that you all are getting these additional tickets and you have these concerns about trying to provide better service, that those are legitimate from your end as an applicant or as a business rather. But there's nobody from the public reaching out to me as a council member to say, I have bad service here and I want somebody to do anything about that. No one. I've never heard anything about that. All I hear is people in the community with a unified voice saying they don't want this. And given that this is on a piece of city-owned property, and it's unlike a situation where we're dealing with a utility in the right-of-way and we might have more limited control, as Tony said, we have pretty open-ended control of our own property here. And without being persuaded of the business case, I can't feel like I'm at the place where I want to make a tough compromise decision about getting a benefit in exchange for a cost. I just see a cost and no benefit. So unless AT&T can show me something else that will persuade me of the business case of the real need for this, that's where I am. So.
Neil?
So first of all, I have seen many complaints about coverage in the area. Like I said earlier, there were a number of reports of decreased coverage as soon as that garage went up. Mostly they came through nextdoor.com, and I know that Tony had any number of calls, and obviously you folks have had them. I'm pretty sure the business case is proven out by the fact that you want to do this, because AT&T doesn't spend money on stuff that it doesn't need, as far as I can imagine. That said, I'm also a big fan of the Muddy Branch Trail and Park. I use it all the time. I lived in Washingtonian Woods for a little while I was waiting for my house in Kentlands to be built. I've used both sides of the creek, and it is a great amenity. I'm not entirely sure that 30 by 50 takes away a big enough chunk to be a huge detriment, but I would love to see a rendering of what the actual facility looks like. Not just ribbons on the tree, that might be useful too, but a photograph of what these sites look like up close, because I can't remember being close to a cell tower facility. Generally not the kind of places that I like to hang out, I think there's a lot of pros and cons here. The pro is that I do believe that there's a need for increased coverage. The con is that, as the neighbors have expressed, it's not really an ideal location. I will give you credit for the fact that when we first talked about this, it was within 160 feet, I believe, of both neighborhoods, of both Lindslade Close and Upshire Circle. It seemed like a really strong breeze, and some of those houses might be a little bit nervous. Now it's 300 feet farther away, which is good, and it's 30 feet less tall above sea level, which is helpful as well. So I want to commend the applicant for making some progress. I think all of us would wish that it would be somewhere else, and I'd still like to know if there's some alternatives. I mean, I really think that the Nike site is something worth exploring, given that, like I said, it's on a list now of federal government properties that they want to dispose of. We looked at it as a potential park site, but we were concerned that there used to be Nike missiles there, so God knows. That might be less of an issue for a cell tower. So anyway, I'd still like to see if there's something that we can do to make this a little less disturbing to one of our natural resources and to the neighbors. But that said, I do think that you're making some progress, so hopefully we can keep making progress.
All right, so it sounds like what I'm hearing is we need some more information. I don't know if we necessarily have to have another presentation, but if you can send us the rendering, the business case, and whatever else has been asked for up here, then we can put it on the agenda for an upcoming meeting as soon as you get that to us. And
Do you want me to I mean, there are, of course, as Neil indicated, we got a number of calls, but we also, more importantly, got a number of written letters to support. We could consolidate them and
put them into the record.
Put them in one place. I mean, they were
maybe a
in
map showing where the trouble tickets specifically originated might be interesting. That'd probably be easy to put
We
together.
could provide you with that, and that's what Steve was showing. That's the circles there. And so we could show you that, and we have that, and we could provide
I mean,
that
I
in
assume
an
if somebody
8.5
reported in
letter.
trouble, they told you where they live.
Yeah,
Yep.
If I may, AT&T tries to, protect the privacy of its users, and so we try to, keep those kinds of things out of the public record where at all possible. I was allowed to kind of consolidate the general area where these tickets occurred. I'm pretty certain I would not be able to get permission from our legal department to give, push pins.
Well, I think if you give us aggregate data in those clusters,
Yeah.
I think that's probably
Okay.
the kind of information
That I
we're
can
asking
do.
for.
Yeah.
If it's 10 in one of those zones, out of how many users that you might have,
Right.
that would be different than if it was 100 or 300 or something. So.
Yeah. If I can also add another little piece to the puzzle, one of the difficulties I have is that we serve customers that live in those homes and then people who travel through this area. And with the Great Seneca Highway, you've got people who are AT&T customers that are not citizens of Gaithersburg. And they travel through commuting or on their way to work or whatever. And they get affected by this, but they don't have a voice in these communities. So I just put that on the table.
Well, I think your coverage map addresses that, but we'd like to know. I think
We
having
understand, yes.
different experiences of reports of trouble or no reports of trouble. So we'd like to. I think it would be useful to know where those are coming from.
Yeah, I'll certainly do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. We're going to move on to the rest of public comments. Anybody who's here to testify on any other topic, please line up and let's hear from you.
Have a public hearing.
Well, we're going to do that after public comments. Come on.
Good evening. My name is Eleanor Davis. While I live in Saybrook, I am here tonight as a member of the Save Kelly Park group, which represents residents from 5 neighborhoods surrounding Kelly Park. Mr. Spiegel, you were mistaken when, after the last city election, you were quoted as saying that only 1 neighborhood opposed using Kelly Park for a new school. Just so you and the rest of the city council are crystal clear about the number of neighborhoods opposed to using Kelly Park, there are 5. We are Audubon Square, Newport Estates, Saybrook, Villa Ridge, and Whetstone Run. We also represent over 3,000 people who have signed our petitions and want you to save Kelly Park. 3,000. MCPS did not invite the 5 surrounding neighborhoods to participate in their site selection process for the new Gaithersburg Elementary School. This mode of operandi is nothing new to MCPS, as we've all heard. We also believe that the whole site selection process was rigged from the beginning so that Kelly Park would come out on top. Forest Oak Middle School is at the end of our street, Saybrook Oaks Boulevard. There is only one way in and one way out. We have a school in our neighborhood that our children cannot go to. So what do we have? We have at least 28 buses 4 times a day, and hundreds of parents and staff speeding down our street to drop off and pick up the students. We have some buses and cars that do not stop at the stop sign. And some don't even stop for students or others that are in the crosswalks. You all know that Kelly Park is owned by the city. Gaithersburg is an incorporated city. Therefore, MCPS cannot take our park for their school unless you let them. I am disappointed that the city is still in negotiations with MCPS regarding Kelly Park. Please, for the love of God and all that is holy, tell MCPS no. Just say no. You won't give, sell, trade Kelly Park, period. No quid pro quo. Instead, tell them to use the sites that they had on their site selection committee. And if they don't like that, then tell them to start the process all over again, including the surrounding neighborhoods. Don't make giving away Kelly Park your legacy, because I guarantee to you that we will never forget how you vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jackie Wozniak, and I live at 1 Library Court in Saybrook, and I too am a member of that famous Kelly Park, Save Kelly Park group, with 5 neighborhoods, and not only 3,000 people's signatures, but many people who visit the park and use it during our summer baseball season. We all appreciate and recognize the need for a new elementary school in Gaithersburg. As the population of our city grows, many other needs and desires compete for finite resources. Yet as we mature, our needs and desires become intertwined, met, or no longer needed. Therefore, we need to attempt to divine what life's ingredients are or will be essential to our survival in the future. This can be accomplished only by reviewing today's finite environmental and economic resources. As City Council, it's your duty to evaluate what is needed and best for Gaithersburg's flora, fauna, and folk, while considering the important role of recreation areas, wetlands, reserves, and open spaces to the meaning of a good life. We need open spaces and park. As my father used to say, God isn't making any more land, so we must use what we have wisely. Therefore, I ask you to tell MCPS no, that you won't give them Kelly Park. Tell them to use their own land on Woodward Road or consolidate build at already existing MCPS sites, built up or out. An example is what MCPS has proposed at Dufeith to rebuild the school on the existing footprint by doubling the capacity of that school. Or go back to the site selection process. I agree, you've got a tough job ahead of you, but we're asking you not to give away Kelly Park and let that not be your legacy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Dave Anderson, and I live in Whetstone Run. I'm a member of the Save Kelly Park, a group that represents 5 neighborhoods: Audubon Square, Newport Estates, Saybrook, Via Ridge, and Whetstone Run. We continue to grow and now have over 3,000 people who've signed our petitions to save Kelly Park. For perspective, that's more than the number of people who voted in the last election. In the last council meeting, I outlined the actions that people to support Save Kelly Park would take if the city council approved the building of the school there. As feedback, I received one indication that my statement was in a threatening tone, and one statement that I would prefer a less threatening approach. On the other hand, I received many comments along the lines of, it needed to be said, and I feel the same way. And surprisingly, I have been given offers of fairly generous campaign contributions since then. People who live around Kelly Park have worked most of their lives to acquire their homes, and it's their biggest asset. Kelly Park was a huge factor in their purchase decision and is part of their vision of their future living arrangements. These people stand to lose in one vote
what they have worked many years to obtain. Hence, the determination you witnessed in the last election and the present. Perhaps you should feel thankful for what I'm saying. Consider this. When you go to vote on the Board of Education's proposal, you will know in advance what the possible consequences will be. Around Kelly Park, those around Kelly Park were not given that courtesy. The Board of Education deliberately did not follow their own procedures by excluding the 5 neighborhoods bordering Kelly Park in the site selection process and then spraying it on people after the decision was made and preparations began. At the next few meetings, I plan to address the problems that you will inherit from the Board of Education if you vote to allow the school at Kelly Park. If they had followed their own procedures, these problems would have been addressed before a final decision and you would not be in this predicament. So I am asking you to do 3 things. One of 3 things. Tell the Board of Education no, that you will not give them Kelly Park. 2, tell them to use their own land on Woodward Road. And 3, or go back to the site selection process and include local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers tonight? Okay, we're going to move on to our public hearing. Invite the Planning Commission up here. Thank everyone for their patience. It's taken us a lot longer to get to this point than we might have thought, but we're here, and let's talk about the sign ordinance. Kurt.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council members and commissioners. I'll wait for everyone to sit down.
Read them all already?
They're in the car. Right, how to do
that. So again, good evening.
Good evening.
This is a joint public hearing on text amendment CTAM 8364-2019, which proposes to repeal and reenact the sign ordinance in its entirety. This hearing was advertised on January 16th and January 23rd, 2020 in the Washington Post and was posted on the city's website beginning on December 18th, 2019. Specific stakeholders were also sent notifications. There are currently 9 exhibits in the record. The individual exhibits may be reviewed at City Hall during regular business hours or on the city's website. Any objections to the receipt of any exhibit should be noted prior to the closing of the record. Otherwise, they will be deemed received into evidence. In response to questions and comments received earlier today, staff has made changes to tonight's presentation. The revised presentation will be posted on the city's projects webpage and will also be entered into the record as an exhibit. So it will differ from what's in your packet and what was previously or what's currently on the webpage. So to give you a little background on this text amendment, the last major change to the city's sign ordinance was in 2006, and since that time, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed that sign ordinances must be content neutral, which means you cannot have restrictions that are based on what the sign says. In addition, popular trends in design and communication have changed, and new technology has been developed, such as shapeable LED lights, projected images, and electronic message displays. The current ordinance's definition of sign is also very broad and includes things like accent lighting and holiday decorations. Overall, the proposed sign ordinance seeks to preserve or expand the amount of signage currently allowed while addressing needed changes. One goal of the new ordinance is to remove sign standards that appear to be content-based, such as real estate signs, election signs, and construction signs. Other standards are also being modified to take a content-neutral approach, such as community identification signs and off-site signs. Another goal is to accommodate new technology and popular design trends, but within a set of standards that avoids visual clutter and promotes safety. Examples of those standards are limiting the brightness of electronic message displays and requiring a minimum distance between freestanding signs. The current definition of sign is also being narrowed to exclude items that are not usually considered signs, such as architectural features, accent lighting, and holiday decorations. Additional goals of the proposed ordinance include promoting business growth and reducing the number of signs that must be approved by the Planning Commission. The new sign ordinance is reorganized to be more logical and user-friendly, including the addition of new tables and graphics that clarify the standards. The new ordinance also proposes to establish a minor waiver process that provides flexibility for unique situations without being overly strict. And I will now walk you through each section of the proposed ordinance. So for consistency, the definition section of the main zoning ordinance, which is section 24-1, is also being changed so that it will match the definition of sign that's included in the sign ordinance. The purpose section features revised statements that include a rationale for each one. The statements, as shown on the slide, reflect a balance between free speech, economic development, public safety, property value protection, the city's overall character, and aesthetics. The definition section retains most of the definitions in the current ordinance, but modifies a few to reflect the content-neutral approach. The most important change is the definition of sign, which has been narrowed to exclude items such as accent lighting, flags, graphics, and shapes. The on-site and off-site distinction is now related to the sponsor of the sign and its relationship to the activity on the land. Architectural features are now excluded from the height and width calculation for the sign area. Several new definitions have been added that are associated with the new standards tables, and several existing definitions have been modified or removed from the ordinance for clarity. Comprehensive sign packages and design guidelines that were approved prior to the enactment of the new sign ordinance remain valid, and new signs may be added under those guidelines rather than using the ordinance's standards. The Planning Commission and Mayor and City Council may continue to approve comprehensive sign packages and design guidelines that deviate from the ordinance's design standards and limits. Some signs are not regulated and do not require sign permits, such as interior signs, holiday and seasonal event signs, signs installed by the government, and most signs located on single-family detached and townhouse properties. And if there are conflicting regulations in the ordinance or conflicts with other sections of the city code, the more restrictive provision will apply. The general provisions section is similar to the language found in the current sign ordinance. It includes a new lot area standard for determining the number of non-building signs allowed, which differs from the current ordinance's use of linear feet. Other provisions in the ordinance include which signs count toward the total allowable signage, the method used to calculate the sign area, standards for lighting and placement, a general maximum height for freestanding signs, and restrictions on placing permanent signs in a public right-of-way. Unlike the current ordinance, the new ordinance does not allow any temporary signs to be placed in a public right-of-way on weekends, which should reduce visual clutter and improve safety. And I'll have more to say about that later. The sign type standards is a new section that retains and groups standards for sign types found in the current ordinance and adds several new ones. The section includes additional standards for specific sign types, such as building signs not being allowed to cover windows and monument signs being required to include a base that touches the ground. The prohibited sign section is nearly identical to the current sign ordinance, but additional signs have been added to the list of signs that are not allowed, including balloon signs, billboards, fence signs, inflatable signs, handheld signs with commercial messages, roof signs, signs for short-term rentals, temporary signs that are illuminated, and unauthorized signs. And all that's really for clarity and also trying to put everything kind of in one place, unlike the current ordinance. The restricted signs section has collected in one place all of those use-based standards found throughout the current sign ordinance. The standards for lots without buildings, off-site commercial signs, and signs in the RB zone have been carried over, while the standards for bed and breakfast and family daycare and home-based businesses have been clarified. The standards for on-site permanent signs have been reorganized into a matrix format with one table for each sign type. The amount of permanent signage allowed is dependent upon the use of the property and its zoning. Signs attached to a building are considered independently of other signs. These building signs will be allowed on all four sides of the building, though there is a cap on the total amount allowed on each facade, as well as a limit on the size of any individual sign. Geographic area signs are a new type that can be used by a subdivision, corporate park, campus, or similar large land area, and are intended to replace the community identification signs of the current ordinance. Geographic area signs are also regulated independently of other signs and have limits based upon the total area of the geography. Permanent signs not attached to a building are treated as a group with an overall allowable signage cap for these signs. Each individual sign type also has separate limits for height, width, size, and number. To encourage the use of monument signs, which have a base touching the ground, Larger signs are allowed for those than for freestanding signs. Monument signs are also allowed additional height and width if they are adjacent to a major highway. Freestanding signs are not, though, just for clarity there. Electronic message displays can be used as a standalone sign, or they can be a portion of a larger sign, but they can only be used in or as part of a monument sign or a building sign. Projected image signs are limited to an absolute maximum size, or if projected on a building, by the % of the building facade area covered. As a reminder, some sign types, such as building signs and monument signs, have additional standards that must also be met, above and beyond those in the matrix tables. And here's an example of one of the standards tables. This one is for the permanent on-site building signs. I think I'm out of order here, I'm sorry. So for the on-site temporary sign section, there's one table for each sign type. It's similar to the permanent sign section, and included in the table are A-frame signs, banners attached to buildings, freestanding banners, and all other freestanding signs and projected image signs. And here's an example of the temporary sign table. The sign permit section and enforcement and penalty sections are nearly identical to the current ordinance, with some minor changes made for clarification. And the waiver section includes two types, a minor waiver and a major waiver. The minor waiver must be allowed by a provision of the sign ordinance and is not intended to be a rubber stamp, but it should provide flexibility for minor deviations from sign standards, as it only requires 4 basic findings. A major waiver can be requested for any deviation from the sign ordinance, but the findings have a higher threshold for approval, and the major waiver is similar to the sign adjustment process of the current ordinance. In addition, there are a few limited sections of the ordinance that allow the Commission to approve a sign that deviates slightly from the regulation with no findings required. And there's also a couple of sections where they can approve it with 1 or 2 additional findings. Staff would now like to show some examples of the similarities and the differences between the current sign ordinance and the proposed ordinance. So signs that are allowed by both the current ordinance and the proposed ordinance include the temporary on-site signs for real estate sales and leasings, elections, new construction, seasonal events, and special events. Staff notes in the new ordinance, these would just all be called temporary signs. They wouldn't be called election or new construction or things like that, because that is what we're trying to avoid. And here's some examples of those signs that would be allowed by both ordinances. So there's an election sign on the, what we used to be called an election sign on the left, and a real estate sign, or what was used to be called a real estate sign on the right. And some additional ones that, again, are allowed under both ordinances. And then signs that are prohibited by both the current ordinance and the proposed ordinance include those listed on this slide. And here again are some examples of that. You can see there's a lot of box signs there. There's some pole signs. There's a lot of signs close to each other, probably more than one sign per lot. So it's the kind of thing that the current ordinance avoids and that we're continuing to avoid with the new ordinance. And then also these are some other signs that, again, are prohibited by both the current ordinance and the proposed ordinance. So the sign that's, or the vehicle that's used primarily as a sign, and then also the billboard signs. Signs that are allowed by the current ordinance but are not allowed in the proposed ordinance include those listed on this slide. And staff notes that all of the permanent signs allowed in the current ordinance are also allowed in the proposed ordinance. So the new ordinance is not proposing to prohibit any currently allowed permanent signs. Now, there are changes to some of the standards in the new ordinance, but in terms of actually prohibiting something that was allowed before, that is not happening for the permanent signs. And here's some examples of what the current ordinance allows that would not be allowed in the new ordinance. So you can see the temporary directional signs, real estate directional signs is what they're called in the current ordinance. They're on the left. On the right is what is called a street banner in the current ordinance. And staff would note that the example there is a private sort of sponsored sign. And just as a reminder, any government-sponsored sign would still be allowed because it's outside of in the new ordinance, it'll be outside of the regulation and the permit process. And again, two other examples of signs that would be allowed in the current ordinance. So an illuminated temporary sign there on the left, and then a handheld commercial sign on the right.
Moving or not, right?
Right, exactly. So signs that are allowed in that the current ordinance does not allow, but the proposed ordinance does allow, are listed here on the screen. There's only a couple of those. And here's some examples. So the new ordinance will allow a permanent or a temporary banner attached to a pole. On the left is what we would probably think of as a permanent banner attached to a pole. And on the right would be the temporary banner attached to a pole. Those signs on the right you see very often in other municipalities, also in the county. And here's some of the projected image signs that would be allowed. So on the left, it's the one that's sort of on the sidewalk, and on the right would be something projected on a building. Staff does note that for the image on the right, that's really just for purposes to show you what it would look like. But the proposal is that it could not cover more than 3% of the facade. So you wouldn't actually be able to get a sign that large projected onto a building in the proposed ordinance.
What percentage of the facade did you say?
3% of the facade, right.
And is there a determination or a differentiation between a sign and artwork? So
Yes.
if someone wanted to do a light installation or an art installation, something active on
Correct.
the facade that didn't have a business name in it, for example?
Correct. So in the definition of sign, there is a list of things that are not signs, just for clarity, and one of those is something, if it's just graphics and there's no words in it, that would not be considered a sign. I'll leave it at that.
So murals would be allowed?
So murals, correct.
Would
Murals
not
would
be considered signs,
right.
they would be considered art.
Correct.
Whether it had words or not.
Correct, and part of that was to encourage them in some way, but part of it's also to reflect the fact that we've seen several of those put up around the city that, such at Washingtonian, there was one at the new bubble tea place there. And I think staff feels that it looks good, and we probably would want to encourage those to continue to. So the proposed sign ordinance reaffirms and strengthens the aesthetic considerations of the current ordinance, such as avoiding visual clutter and blight. And here's a sort of a list of some of the things that are attempting to accomplish those goals. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm not sure if I need to, and here's some examples, I'm sorry, of the types of aesthetics that we're trying to avoid. So on the left, the signs that have fallen over, that might start to be the beginnings of blight, and then on the right where you just have so many signs that you can't read them and it starts to look like visual clutter. And this is just an example of, in Wheaton, they have their nice community identification sign there, is what we would have used to have called that, right, the Wheaton sign. And then you also have the older signs that are sort of left over from before. And of course in the city we have some of those older signs that might have been grandfathered in that hopefully over time, when they're replaced, they will be replaced with a sign that looks more like the more pleasing Wheaton sign. And that is actually now the end of my presentation. So I don't know if I do the recommendations now, or do you?
We'll take care of that.
Okay, perfect.
So,
and I'm available for questions.
Oh, awesome. Questions, comments? Who'd like to start?
So real quickly, so permanent signs that are grandfathered, what determines whether something can be grandfathered as opposed to being removed if it's not compliant with the new regulation, the new ordinance?
Anything that was legal.
Right, so if it was, there is a provision in the proposed ordinance that allows signs that were approved prior to the enactment of the ordinance to remain as legal non-conforming signs. The current ordinance for a short period of time did attempt to use something called amortization to require signs that were non-conforming to be replaced within a certain time period. It somewhat overlapped with, I think, the recession, and so there was a decision to not go forward with that. So all of those signs that were grandfathered in previous ordinances would continue to be grandfathered. Staff has seen some of them replaced recently, some of the pole signs, for example. There's one on North Frederick Avenue, just north of the bridge, that was replaced. So once they come down completely, they won't be able to be put back up. Or once they meet that threshold of the 50% replacement.
So a sign like that, even if the business changed and they changed the name, that's still grandfathered?
It depends on how much of the sign they change.
Okay.
Similar to the current ordinance, if they change more than 50%, that's considered a structural alteration, and then it would have to come in compliance with the proposed ordinance.
Yes.
I have a question about neon signs. I was trying to determine what regulations might apply to neon. There's a lot of neon in storefront windows and things like that.
Correct. So the current ordinance specifically calls out neon signs, and especially those in the windows, and tries to limit them in a certain way. In the new ordinance, we've actually reduced the amount of window signage allowed generally, unless it's for a temporary type thing. So we really just decided to treat all of those the same rather than, singling out neon. A lot of neon today is not really neon. Also, it's being replaced by LED or other things, and it gets to become a little bit of a guessing game as to whether something would be a neon sign, or if it's more of an LED lighted sign that looks like neon, or that. So we kind of decided to get away from that in the proposed ordinance.
So you just call them internally illuminated or something along those lines?
We still define them in the ordinance, but we would just treat them as a window sign for purposes of the ordinance.
Okay. All right, because I know that at least on Main Street in Kentlands, a lot of the neighbors have been thinking that a lot of the signs in the windows are not attractive, looking like clutter and things along those lines. I don't know if those are really enforced by the homeowners association or by the city.
Right. So outside of the sign ordinance, there are other potential enforcement areas, and one of them would be a homeowners association. I'm not sure if the live works on Main Street are subject to a homeowners association
They
or
are.
not. Okay, so the homeowners association could have different rules that would be above and beyond what's
They'd be
in
more
the sign
restricted.
ordinance. Correct.
So is there, in terms of enforcement, I know the city has people that drive around, and if they spot a building infraction or if there's some construction going on that hasn't been permitted, they'll go after it. Do we have somebody doing that on signs as well?
It could happen if they happen to be driving around for something else and notice something that was pretty egregious. They probably would stop, and I think that has happened in the past, actually. But a lot of it is reactive. Kind of, in fact, a lot of our enforcement is reactive. Once we are made aware of something, then an inspector will go out and investigate and do the proper citations if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Okay, so Kirk, as you know from my email earlier before the meeting, one of the concerns that I had was with respect to how we're going to regulate temporary signage. And I certainly understand, the concept behind the 2015 Supreme Court decision that we can't really distinguish or discriminate between content. Our existing ordinance allows, over the course of the weekend, certain real estate signage to be put up in the public right of way and then taken down on Sunday night, and we often see the little pickup trucks driving around the city,
Right.
stopping every few feet and putting them up. And I agree that in many cases, particularly with new construction, you get a lot of these signs clumped together. It looks like clutter, and it doesn't look good, and it could potentially present some public safety issues in terms of blocking other signage or pedestrian pathways and things like that. However, I do think there is a legitimate argument to be made that in limited fashion, whether it's for commercial purposes or non-commercial purposes, you could see groups or businesses or individuals that might have a decent case for needing to use the public right-of-way for a limited period of time. So in addition to wayfinding signage for a real estate agent who might be having an open house in a community and they need to direct potential buyers into the community, you might also see a church that needs to direct people to where their services are on a Sunday morning and wants to be able to stick a sign out for 2 or 3 hours, or any variety of other kinds of nonprofit or commercial purposes. Now the concern here is, how could we possibly make a potential change to our ordinance that would allow some flexibility on a limited front without opening up the floodgates to everyone and their mother who wants to put a sign in our public right-of-way, and basically getting us right back to the problem of the clutter that we're trying to get rid of. I don't know the answer to that, but I want us to kind of think about that a little bit strategically and see whether the trade-offs might be worth exploring, whether it really does make sense to fully ban all sorts of temporary signs under all conditions in the public right-of-way. And we might ultimately decide that's what we have to do just because that's what the Supreme Court has essentially told us to do. Although I understand that the Supreme Court decision from 2015 technically didn't cover commercial signs. Although I would imagine that the same logic they applied to the signs in that case would also apply in a commercial sign case. So I'm grappling with this issue. I don't know if we have a clear answer, but one of the things I kind of threw out as I was talking to our city attorney and also to Frank Johnson earlier about is maybe we could regulate the volume or frequency of signs in the public right-of-way as opposed to the content. Maybe there's a way to thread the needle there to make sure that we don't have clutter, because there could be only one temporary sign every however many feet or something like that. I'm just kind of spitballing here. I'm not saying that necessarily is what we would end up with. And I still think we'd have the challenge of, are we inadvertently picking winners and losers in terms of who gets to put their sign out? Or is it just a race to be the first to put your sign out? But I want us to at least have that conversation and think about whether the trade-off is worth it. Because I do think we're going to be tying the hands of different organizations and businesses and nonprofits a little bit. And let me just say one more thing. I also acknowledge that this is not about private property temporary signs. Those can still be put up. And even, in a lot of communities where you have an HOA or another, some kind of nonprofit that owns a big chunk of, land that might be up against a public right-of-way could potentially allow those temporary signs. We're not talking about that. We're talking about just the public right-of-way.
And to piggyback on that, I'd love a clarification, not at this moment, but as you kind of address that question in the background, if it matters that the right-of-way is a state highway versus a city property versus some other level of jurisdiction, if there's somebody else takes precedent over our regulation, I don't know, or if we care, maybe that's not even relevant, but just put that in the context if you would.
Right. So the first thing I'd like to just reiterate is that the current sign ordinance, if you read it, it really only allows temporary real estate directional signs in the right-of-way on the weekends. That's the only thing. So the other items you were talking about technically are not allowed in the current ordinances either for the nonprofits and whatnot.
Right, but we would have to be non-discriminatory in whatever change we make.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
So I'll defer to the city attorneys about whether you would be able to restrict a category of signs, be it commercial versus non-commercial, be it sponsored by a nonprofit versus sponsored by a for-profit. But I would point out that the change you're talking about would be a less restrictive change to the proposed ordinance, so that would not require another public meeting and or public hearing. And again, city attorneys can jump in if I'm saying this incorrectly. My understanding is that if a proposal was to make a more restrictive change to the ordinance that was not discussed during this meeting tonight, that would require an additional public hearing. But you're talking about actually reducing the restriction by potentially allowing more signs in the public right-of-way on a temporary basis. And I think some of the things you mentioned in terms of trying to balance allowing them, even if you have to allow all of them, all types of them, with making sure you don't have visual clutter. I think you had a couple of things that make sense. Requiring a certain distance between the signs, perhaps limiting them to so many signs per sponsor or something to that effect. Maybe would be another way. There are some communities that limit them by size or by material. So if it's a plastic sign, it can only, it must be smaller than something that's more substantial. Although I would think we would want to sort of limit them to the smaller signs, but that's really up to you guys to.
So these non-content factors like how much time they can be up, or
Correct.
what time of day or what day of the week, or what materials they might be able to be made out of, what size they might be. Those are things we could potentially regulate for temporary signs in the public right-of-way if we wanted to allow them in some limited fashion it wouldn't touch the content issue.
Correct. I
Okay.
believe that is correct. That, in lawyer speak, that would be time, place, and manner restriction, I think
Right.
is what that is called. But yes,
Okay.
I believe that those are allowable as long as you're not. In the Gilbert case, which was the 2015 case, the Supreme Court sort of made a comment, and I'm paraphrasing here, about if you have to read the sign, then it's probably regulating the content or the message of the sign to tell what the sign is. And that was kind of the big issue. So.
Phil?
I was just going to say, I think when this came before the Planning Commission for sponsorship, one of the things I sort of poked around at, and I think can be possibly address the concern, is the fact that, like we mentioned earlier, enforcement of this is largely reactive. The city is not establishing a sign police force to drive around and patrol the right-of-ways. So if there's a way to establish a standard, be it distance separation, that would allow somebody to clearly complain about it and allow the city to clearly go out and find a violation without banning everything, I think that sort of dovetails in with the reality of how this is going to be enforced.
John, go ahead, please.
I just had one other question. I wanted to ask about white box
As long as
signs.
it's not as long as the first question.
I make no promises. It's about white box signs.
Sure.
We've had commercial property owners who have expressed concern about, this might not actually apply in their situation, so I'm asking for a little bit of clarification here, but if they have a retail tenant space and a new tenant comes in and the tenant has invested a lot of time and money in a trademark or a logo, which happens to work best or look best against a white background, how does the prohibition on the white box sign affect that? Is a white box sign really only a prohibition of a certain kind of sign, not just any sign that happens to have a white background?
So there's two provisions in the current ordinance that were basically carried forward to the new one. One of them is a box sign that's smaller than a certain size, and I don't remember off the top of my head how big it is. That can be completely internally illuminated, which is one thing. In terms of the white, I think the primary idea was to not allow illuminated white box signs. So if the white is opaque, I believe that is allowed currently and would be allowed under the new one. I'll double check that later.
All right.
But
So I'm thinking about, if there's a restaurant chain that moves into a retail space and they
Right.
have a preset, well-known trademark, maybe, their national
right.
chain.
So the other thing I would also point out with the sign ordinance, the proposed sign ordinance, is that there is the provision about the sign packages and design guidelines. So if it's a larger development where the property owner thinks that's going to be an issue, they could actually write that into their design guidelines or into their sign package to allow that.
Okay, thank you.
John.
Oh, okay, thanks. Go back to what was emerging, and one of the answers you were giving earlier was something about graphics and art versus something else. So just based on what we do now for icon signs, which is a special category of approval,
right?
Versus, for sake of argument, if somebody walked in and did a really beautiful artistic, say, reptile, and it happened to be the logo for their company also, where are we playing in terms of that?
Correct. So the icon signs, that whole thing is proposed to be no longer in the new ordinance. And under the definition of sign, as I mentioned earlier, if something is only graphics and doesn't have any words, then generally it's not a sign. However, if it is a corporate logo or a trademark or something like that, it would still be considered a sign, and that we felt that was kind of a fair way to approach it, that if it is something that's more of a commercial type use in nature, that it should still count towards your total allowable signage and things like that. So it could still be allowed, but the Planning Commission would not have to approve that type of sign anymore.
Any other questions before we go to the public? Okay. Well, this is the time the Mayor and Council and Planning Commission would like to hear from anybody in the public who'd like to speak on this topic. Same rules as before. Do we have any testimonies tonight?
You knew I waited here this long because of this, right?
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for your patience.
Mike, grab the mic and just,
Mike Aubrey, 310 Crown Park Avenue. Obviously, my issue is with regard to temporary open house signs. I just have some quick comments. I want to thank the council, mayor, and city staff for all that you do to keep Gaithersburg as the best city in America to live. I've lived here for more than 20 years and am myself a steward of the city. I think I am. I would like to give you some brief comments about the request to change the sign ordinance as it exists in the city code, specifically how it will impact the sector that I work in, which is real estate. with all the moves towards high tech in my industry, one would be very surprised that such a low tech thing is still a big difference maker for me. Putting directional signs out when I do open houses on weekends, especially in the areas where I work in the city of Gaithersburg, Kentlands, Lakelands, Washingtonian Woods, people don't just see it online. They see the signs, they drive by. Their excellent salesman who's at the open house sells them that property because they saw that sign. And here's the reality. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek. The reality is every time a house sells here, we create a lot of money for city government. It's a big deal. We create a lot of money for our citizens as well. So in terms of the economic impact, it's there. I mean, it really is. And I think that something this simple can make selling a home harder. And I think that we hamper our citizens by doing it. I think that I'm aware of Reed versus the town of Gilbert and its impetus to the proposed change with regard to the city code. Reed wasn't about real estate signs though, and to utilize a one-size-fits-all approach to be compliant, I think is wrought with a lot of pitfalls, specifically with regard to open house signs. The more litigious members of the real estate industry, and this one's for you, Lynn, may recommend that real estate signs should be expressly permitted because they are commercial speech, as defined by the United States Supreme Court, which also wasn't addressed in Reed versus the town of Gilbert ruling. I don't want to go that way. I have an easier solution for you. Don't do anything about this in the short term. Don't make it so you can't put it up and wait for somebody to sue. And if they do, then you can make a rule saying no open house signs. If it isn't broke, don't fix it, is kind of where I'm at on this. I did forward a guidance paper that NAR, the National Association of Realtors, commissioned from Robinson and Cole to be added to the record that you guys should read. It has a lot of cool things that a lot of municipalities around the country have done to get past the open house sign thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Zach Trupp, and I serve as the Associate Government Affairs Director for the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors. I come to you today to speak on behalf of Montgomery County's more than 12,000 realtors, property managers, title attorneys, and other real estate professionals, as well as thousands of area consumers and residents. The purpose of this testimony is to ask the city to protect the rights of homeowners and consumers by ensuring that any amendments to the city code's sign ordinance avoids potential unintended consequences. Signage is critical to the real estate industry. While the industry's digital footprint has dramatically increased in the last few years, physical signage continues to play an important role in helping people find homes. They identify available properties, provide necessary contact information to potential buyers or renters, and offer open house directions to interested parties. Any regulation that would hinder the free flow of commercial information to the public would have an economic impact and would be a disservice to both the current and potential city residents. We greatly appreciate the depth and detail of the city's planning division and what they put into the proposed amendments. Though sign ordinance faces strict scrutiny regarding content-based regulation, they can still regulate duration and placement without content specifications. To avoid unintended consequences, realtor associations around the country have provided vital assistance to governments and municipalities to help deliver successful legislative action. We would offer recent regulatory reforms made in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Senatobia, Mississippi, as examples of these accomplishments, and are happy to provide further insight into the nuts and bolts of their efforts. If this ordinance is passed as presented today, we fear the effect it will have on the real estate market in Gaithersburg. Thank you for your consideration of our association's perspective, and we are happy to answer any questions at any time.
Thank you. Any other testimonies? Lorianne, please, go right ahead.
So I had a question. The gentleman just mentioned regulate duration. What are we doing currently to regulate the duration of these temporary signs?
So the current ordinance allows them to be placed in the right-of-way on the weekends, and there's actually a time period. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it's around noon on Saturday to, I want to say, like 8 a.m. or something like that on Monday.
I think it starts Friday. I could be wrong. But
Okay, it might be Friday.
It's somewhere Friday afternoon.
Yeah, so it's a, in that kind of regulation, again, that's a time type regulation that would be allowed. I think what Ryan was talking about earlier about whether you can limit it to just real estate signs may not be feasible. So you may have to accept the other types of signs that would be out there, including, Get Fit,
Dry cleaners
Gold,
this way.
right, things like that.
Right.
So when I'm asking about regulating duration, what happens to signs left outside of that window?
Right, so.
How are they fined and, or?
I'm not sure that they're fined necessarily, but I know that some of the staff, if they are out and about and they do see them, you know, Monday afternoon or whatever, they usually just take them out, yes, so.
They're not returned.
No.
But I mean, the ordinance does actually allow
correct
a penalty, right, per sign?
Or warning?
That I'm not sure about. It certainly allows them to be removed, but I'm not sure if we've actually, I'd have to look at the ordinance to see if there's.
Lynn, do you know the answer to that question?
It does allow the fines.
Okay. Could say that into the mic, just so.
For the record.
For the record. For our giant YouTube audience.
Yeah, the ordinance does allow for fines as part of the enforcement mechanism.
And it's per violation.
Correct.
So each misplaced or each sign that's cited is a violation, a separate violation.
Correct.
And so that currently includes not only real estate directional signs that are placed outside of the limited weekend time, but also any other type of sign that's not a real estate directional sign that's placed in the right of way at any time, like an electioneering sign, things like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah. Understand what the need for the changes. Are we just trying to update the code, or
Right.
is
So
it too much that you're picking up?
Right, so
too many
staff
signs?
took the approach to just, because only the one type was allowed anyway, we just took the approach to just not allow any of them. But again, that was one suggestion. Certainly, the mayor and council can discuss and come up with some better solutions if they feel that's appropriate.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that the temporary signs that I see for real estate have generally been handled reasonably, with the exception of sometimes there's a new apartment building or something that'll put 12 of the same signs on the same corner. So I would say that, you know, within reason, you know, I think going along with a lot of what Ryan's comment said, allowing the temporary signs within the proscribed hours and then putting some geographical limitations on what proximity that the signs can be put to each other to avoid that level of clutter would probably be worth a try. And, you know, a year from now, we might be having a different conversation depending on, you know, whether we suddenly have a giant proliferation of these signs. But, you know, I just, you know, I know that people like to drive through neighborhoods and see what's out there, and that's one of the easiest ways for them to do that. So I would hate to lose that just because the Supreme Court made a decision that makes it more challenging.
I agree with that too. And so, Kirk, you said before that if you were to amend the draft here to reflect that we wouldn't have to go through another announcement of public hearing. It's making it less restrictive.
Right,
So
correct. And I believe also because you're discussing it now, it's part of the public hearing. So
Yeah.
I believe we would be able to respond to your comments. So I believe the process, and Lynn or someone can jump in if I'm saying this incorrectly, I believe the process would be that we could revise the ordinance to reflect what you're talking about here and present that to the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Okay.
And along with the, you know, noting which changes were made and things like that as part of that.
Great. Okay, well, recommendations.
Well, staff recommends the Planning Commission hold their record open until 5 p.m. on Monday, March 9th, 2020. It's 35 days with anticipated recommendation on March 18th, 2020. What is the pleasure of the commission?
So moved.
Second. It's moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay,
That passes unanimously.
Thank you. Our recommendation is that we keep our record open until 5 p.m. Friday, April 3rd, 60 days with policy discussion on April 20th. What's the pleasure of the council?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so be it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the testimony. Next is from the Mayor and City Council. We're going to start with Councilmember Sesma.
Okay, I still have my notes. Nothing else has happened since the last time I looked. Let's see, a week ago, Saturday, we joined the, participated in the Lunar New Year celebration at Lake Forest Mall. I think that's been going on for about 20 years. and we've been a partner with CCACC on that great celebration. We had a lot of elected officials from throughout the county participating in that as well, so it was nice to see a great turnout. Last week we had a social gathering with our colleagues in the city of Rockville, with Mayor and City Council of Rockville, at a restaurant in Rockville this time. It was a great opportunity to get to know each other. They have 2 new members on their city council, and you know, they're learning the ropes. But there are a lot of things that we have in common, Gaithersburg and Rockville, and I think it gives us an opportunity. I mean, we didn't talk about any specific governmental issues, but just kind of what the job is about in terms of being on city council and issues that they're dealing with, as well as what we're talking about in our city council. And then Saturday evening, a couple of us attended, 3 of us attended the Young Artists Award concert at the Arts Barn. Again, just an amazing display of talent from the young artists, the winners and the honorable mentions for 4 categories. And the participants ranged, there were 44 participants this year in the competition. We saw the winners, first, second, third place, and honorable mention in 4 categories. They ranged in age from 12 to 18. It's amazing how much talent there is there. They come from all over the region. So, but a number of them were from Gaithersburg as well. And so the last thing I want to address is this issue of a lot of fear and anxiety about something that the entire world is actually, it's a global issue, and this is the coronavirus, which has originated in China. And a lot of people are very worried about it and the potential for that virus to spread in the United States. I can tell you with great confidence that more people will die from the influenza this year in the United States than will suffer from the coronavirus. We've already had 8,000 flu deaths and over 150,000 people hospitalized just with the flu. So if you haven't got your flu shot yet, it's a wise thing to do, especially if you're in a vulnerable age group or have a chronic health condition that might cause problems. But let me give you some background here. We had an email today from the Executive Secretariat of the National Institutes of Health where I work. And so I'll just read you some notes from that. It says the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention states that the risk to the U.S. public is considered low at this time for the coronavirus. As of this date, there are no confirmed cases in states where NIH facilities are located, including the greater Washington, D.C., metropolitan area, North Carolina, or Montana. We should realize when a new disease arises, it's natural for people to be concerned and seek guidance on necessary precautions to keep yourself, your family, your colleagues, and patients safe. According to the CDC recommendations, and with any other disease like this, just like with sudden fever or respiratory illness, and coronavirus, like the flu, is a respiratory illness. If you're feeling sick, you should stay home and contact your healthcare provider. It's far more likely at this time that your illness is caused by a typical respiratory virus or influenza. If you or someone you know is experiencing symptoms that include fever, cough, and difficulty breathing, and has recently traveled to China or has been in contact with someone who fell ill after a recent visit to China, you should seek medical care right away and avoid contact with others. Before seeking medical care, please follow these steps. Call ahead before going to see a doctor or entering an emergency room. Tell them your symptoms. Let them know if you were in China or exposed to someone who fell ill after a recent visit from China. And then just the following recommendations for flu season. For preventive measures that you can take for any communicable illness. Wash your hands frequently with soap and water, at least 20 seconds. Alcohol-based hand sanitizers are also acceptable when soap and water are not available. Cover your mouth with a tissue when coughing or sneezing, and if you don't have a tissue, use your upper sleeve, not your hands. Avoid touching eyes, mouth, and nose with unwashed hands. Avoid close contact with individuals who are sick. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects and surfaces. That includes door handles, car locks, etc. Just be aware of that. When you're sick, stay home. When you're sick, stay home. And limit contact with others. Do not come to work or travel. The CDC recommends remaining at home for at least 24 hours after you no longer have a fever. Keep in mind that influenza and other respiratory viral infections are currently circulating widely throughout the community. It's that time of the year. So get your flu shot. It's not too late. Most places you can get the flu shot for free. Most health insurance programs cover that free as well. So there's lots of ways to get information about the coronavirus or just influenza season. The CDC has a great website on this, www.cdc.gov, and then you can type in coronavirus once you get to that site. So take precautions, be aware of that. If you think you're sick, stay home until you're diagnosed or until your fever passes. You know, like I said, more people are going to be affected by influenza than by the coronavirus in the United States at this point. So that's just my public service announcement for the evening. Sorry to go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, to all those celebrating or observing, or who just recently celebrated or observed the Lunar New Year, I want to wish you a Happy New Year. I was sad to not be able to attend the event at Lake Forest Mall, but my family did attend the Lunar New Year celebration in downtown DC in Chinatown this past weekend. It was really nice. I want to echo what Mike said about the Young Artist Awards program. I was able to attend most of it the other night. As we joke, if you ever want to go anywhere to question whether you've actually done anything meaningful with your life, go to the Young Artist Award ceremony, and see these incredible kids who've accomplished so much just as teenagers, and we're very proud to host that event. I want to offer my congratulations to Councilmember Sales for organizing and hosting a wonderful Gaithersburg Up-County Breakfast Club meeting the other day with members of the community, the business community, elected officials from all over the Up-County region and the Gaithersburg area. It was really a wonderful event, so kudos to you. And then finally, I just want to, again, let my colleagues and the public know that I appreciate your indulgence this spring as I continue to serve out my year as statewide president of the Maryland Municipal League. I'll be spending a lot of time in Annapolis and traveling around the state to advocate on behalf of the city of Gaithersburg and the many other municipalities in the state. I think we as a city really appreciate the return on investment that we get from being leaders in the MML. Just in the last couple of weeks, I apologize that I was unable to make a couple of meetings because I was traveling to Washington County and the Eastern Shore and spending some time in Annapolis testifying at briefings and hearings and meeting with the new Speaker of our House of Delegates and the new President of our State Senate. The work continues and it will be busy through April, but again, I appreciate your patience.
Thanks for your service, Ryan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your service. Neil.
All right, well, it's already getting late and we have a lot more to do, so I'm going to keep it very brief. I just want to thank my colleagues and our friends in the City Council and Mayor of Rockville for joining us at that social gathering last week. I thought it was really a good chance to get to know each other and even for them internally to relate as human beings and as we do here as well. That makes things go much easier. And as Mike said, we didn't actually have specific business to talk about. There was a joke made about merging our two cities together and taking over the county. It's probably a good idea, but it's really a joke. At any rate, we will find more ways to work with them and hopefully continue the socializing so that we can make that easier as we go forward. That's it for now. Thanks.
Kudos to you for organizing that. Lorianne.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy Black History Month to everyone. Thank you again, Tony, for sharing the GARE information and for making sure that we advance racial equity in the city of Gaithersburg. I attended the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Committee meeting last week. Ryan was also in attendance, and we met with our new chair and our new Senate President and our new House Speaker. So it was good to have dialogue with them about the Maryland Municipal League's legislative priorities and really get honest feedback on the areas in which we're going to need to work with our new legislators more closely and be realistic about our expectations with the budget demands in other areas this year. So we'll keep you posted, but we'll keep working on our legislative agenda. The Doghouse had their grand opening in Kentlands. It was very well attended. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. The 2020 Women's Legislative Briefing was held on last Sunday. It was well attended, as it usually is. It gets bigger every year. They pilot their legislative agenda for women. They have amazing breakout sessions. We had our county executive from Montgomery County, County Executive Elrich. We also had the county executive from Prince George's County, Angela Brooks, also was in attendance, and a few of our federal elected officials. Chris Van Hollen gave a welcome address and updated us on how things are going with the impeachment hearing. As we all know, I believe they had their closing arguments today. So I also attended an interesting event last week, the Maryland Israel Reception and Exhibit in partnership with the Israeli American Council, the Bender JCC, and Embassy of Israel, commemorating the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And the exhibit featured Albanian Muslims who protected and hid the Jewish families who were fleeing violence. And so it's just an interesting learning experience and well attended by representatives from the state. So yeah, that was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorianne. Just a couple announcements. A reminder that we have our Gaithersburg Reads program going on, culminating in an event on March 31st. There have been some developments that have arisen, which it's way too late to get into that now, but just look for announcements and discussion of this on the Gaithersburg Book Festival website and on social media. Also, the main book festival is happening on May 16th, and we have a lot of our authors listed on the website now. Really an amazing lineup is shaping up. I will be, just a quick announcement, I will be on Thursday at Indianapolis for the Maryland Mayors Association Conference. I received, separate matter, I received an email from the Sierra Club asking for a letter of support for an initiative to expand MARC service, and I think they need a pretty quick turnaround on this letter. I sort of wanted to get a nod of heads. I think we're all in agreement that expanded MARC service would be good, would serve the city well.
Yes.
So we could leave it up to staff at this point.
I'm told in the text message that the deadline for receiving that letter is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, so I'm not sure how much time.
Well, there was a second, that's for the House one, but there's a second hearing too with the Senate.
Okay.
So we can, whatever, we can do our best, and if we can't get it in on time, it's kind of their fault. I didn't receive this email from them until like after business hours today. And we have Jess here. Are you going to introduce Jess?
I was, yes.
Okay, then I'm not going to step on your toes here. I will just make one more announcement, and we'll go to you, and that is next week we have a joint work session with the Board of Supervisors of Elections for a debrief on the 2019 city elections. And with that, we'll go to from the city manager, and we'll introduce Jess.
Thank you. It's okay. I warned her this afternoon that she probably wouldn't get introduced till at least 8:30, 8:40.
She got the bonus.
She was
points.
okay. So, but Jess, you're gonna come up to the podium. I think actually you've all met at least briefly Jess Quasney, who's our new Legislative Affairs Manager. She comes to us well qualified and used to sitting through hearings and making productive time out of downtime. So if you want to make any remarks, it would be great.
Yeah, and I don't have to drive home from Annapolis tonight, so that's a little better. But yeah, I'm Jess Honke, and I believe that I've emailed everybody so far, received messages back, introducing myself. It's late, so I won't go into two-page bio. But if you do have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, but I'm excited to be here, having worked at the state level for several nonprofits, long ago as a House of Delegates Chief of Staff in Virginia. So I've had a lot of experience at the state level, moving towards the local level. I'm looking forward to seeing how the work at the state level is implemented and flows down to the local levels. And so I think that'll be an exciting opportunity. And I've had such a warm welcome from the city manager's office and the staff. And if it's any indication of how this is going to go, I'm thrilled to be here. And again, if you have any questions, please ask. And I'm always going to be in my office or in Annapolis, so I will send out my new work email, not my work email, sorry, the work cell phone number. I just got that. And you can contact me with any questions or concerns you have.
Great. Excellent. Let's give Jess a round of applause.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
It was weak. It's like a 10:25 p.m. round of applause. We could do better anyway. Our meetings don't always go this late, just so you know. Tony, go ahead.
Just a couple more items. We're trying to keep some energy behind the discussion we just had on pesticides and herbicides. We're having a follow-up meeting this week in hopes of getting you the information that you requested from that work session as quickly as we can. You'll also we've added another presentation to you, brief, at a future council meeting about something called desk side recycling, which is meant to improve our own operations internally. But it's a nice addition to our program, and I want to compliment Deb Moran and Mike Johnson for really putting a lot more energy behind our internal program than we've had previously. So looking for great things for them. That's it.
Great. Thank you. Economic Development, Tom Lonergan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll greatly curtail my comments and just mention that, as most of you know by now, Brews and Barrels will be taking over the old Potomac Pizza Deli spot in the Kentlands at 625 Center Point Way. Just wanted to report that I was over there earlier today, not to drink, just to introduce myself. They expect to be open for business next Tuesday, February 11th. In addition to dining options, whiskey and beer are featured prominently on the menu, but they seem to carry a lot of spirits. And they expect to employ 40 or more people, and they're actively hiring right now. If you're interested, go to their website. I'll end it there.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thanks. Next, we have ordinances, resolutions, and regulations. I have Ron Kazmarek and Dennis Enslinger coming to talk to us about additions and renovations for 16 South Summit.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
Tonight we are asking approval for two resolutions related to awarding contracts for the 16 South Summit project. I thought I'd give you a brief overview of the project and then turn it over to Ron and Brian to kind of give you a little bit more detail on the two resolutions. As you're aware, the city acquired 16 South Summit with the intent of making it the police station headquarters. With that, we will be doing a number of modifications to the building, including complete renovation of the existing structure and then several additions. One of them is the Sally Port, but also the new police station building. Here are some views of renderings of what the project will look like upon completion. You can see in this picture down in the lower left-hand corner is the new Sally Port addition that would be added on to the facility. This would be the rear of the building. For some people, it would actually be what they would consider the front entrance of the building, because that's probably where they'll go most of the time. This would be the location for the council chambers entrance. One of the items that we have worked into the contract based upon the bid amounts is the police outbuilding, which provides us with a little bit more security when setting cars, in terms of looking at some of the downloading materials that we get with each police station, but also if there are any IT concerns with those vehicles. Just to give you an idea of the floor plan, the majority of the first floor would be occupied by the police department, and then a portion would also be occupied by the relocation of the city council chambers and overflow room, with also a community room located on the first floor. The second floor would be entirely dedicated to the police department, and then the third floor at this point contains gym, workout activity for the police station department, but also for all city employees. The remainder of the project will be built out at a later point in time and would probably involve the relocation of one of the departments or divisions within City Hall at this point, because we're running out of room at City Hall. Just to give you a little bit further detail on the council chambers relocation, again, it includes a new council chambers, what we would consider the overflow. So we will be, as you could tell tonight, we are really at occupancy for this particular room. So as things get along, we will have almost 40 more chairs in the main portion, and then another 20 some chairs in the overflow room. This is a view of the lobby area entering the council chambers, and this is a rendering of the council chambers itself. This is from the overflow room, so we really have tried to integrate the overflow room into the council chambers, which is a little bit different than it is here at City Hall. As you're aware, the overflow room is actually upstairs and requires people to traverse the stairwell or the elevator to kind of access that. Really, the next steps are to finalize the contracts. They're pretty much at 99.9% done. We're still working on a couple of numbers with regard to those. Construction would start in March or April of this year, and completion of the project in May. Before I turn it over to Ron and Brian to kind of go over the resolutions, I did want to reiterate this has really been a real collaborative effort with various departments within the city. And I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to thank and acknowledge some of the individuals who spent a number of their hours during the day, but also some off time, reviewing the over 100-page document in terms of the plans, but I think it's a 1,500-page specification document with regarding to this. Some of those individuals were from the police department, John Breck and Chris Vance. IT also included Andrew Barnes, Jen Conway, Guy Goodnow, Rick Rolls, and then Planning and Code, Greg Mann and Rob Imard. And then also the two individuals sitting with me have spent a lot of time on this project, and I think we've done a really good job of getting it out to bid. I think the bids show that. We were actually on budget for this particular project, and it should be a really exciting project for the community. With that, I'll let Ron kind of go over the main contract with the general contractor.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Before you tonight is a resolution authorizing the city manager to award a construction contract to Forrester Construction for the additions and renovations to 16 South Summit. As you know, the design was done under RFP 2017-012, which was advertised on October 21st, 2016. The proposal was received on November 22nd, 2016, and we selected Schrader Group LLC as the design architect. The construction RFP was RFP 2020-005. It was advertised on the city's webpage and on eMaryland Marketplace. The advertisement went out on September 11th of 2019. We received our proposals back on November 19, 2019, where the city received 5 proposals. The proposal that we're going in front of you tonight is to award the contract to Forrester Construction for $15,773,815. The construction budget for this project was $16.1 million, and we recommend the award to Forrester in the amount of $630,499.50. That is for the additional alternates that we've added. Of the 7 alternates that we had in the bid package, we are accepting 6 of them. Alternate number 2 was for the lobby floor finishes, which was a deduction. Alternate number 3 was for the outbuilding, the addition for the police outbuilding. Alternate 4 is a reduction of removing of receptacles from the locker rooms. Number 5 was the building facade improvements, which was a reduction of $227,000. Number 6, there's a typo for alternate 6. It should be a plus in your package versus a minus for the cellular DAS addition. And then alternate 7, which is for the DAS. Subject to your questions.
So explain what number 6 is. What does that mean?
It's the distributed antenna system. Yes, distributed antenna system. It's the cellular backup for the police to use communications if the primary network of the city land went down.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have performance clauses in this?
Yes.
Or performance milestones clauses, whatever, and/or penalties?
Yes, there is a liquidated damages clause in the contract.
Someone want to move the resolution?
Move the resolution.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries 4-0. Shall we go on to Brian's?
Yes, sir. Good evening. We're also here tonight seeking a resolution to authorize the purchase of equipment and installation services from Washington Professional Services for broadcast and audiovisual systems, also at 16 South Summit Avenue. The new council chambers at 16 South Summit Avenue and its associated spaces require specialized broadcast video and audiovisual systems. In recognition of this, the city issued a request for proposal number 2018-003 on July 25th of 2017. There were 5 respondents, and the selection team unanimously chose Washington Professional Services as the winning offerer. A not-to-exceed contract for system design, as required by the RFP, was awarded to Washington Professional Services in the amount of $51,868.70. Washington Professional Services has significant experience with broadcast and audiovisual systems. They were engaged by the city in 2008 to design and build the current council chambers broadcast system, which is in use here tonight. In 2009, Washington Professional Services also designed and built the audio recording studio over at the Old Town Youth Center. Washington Professional Services has worked with the building architect and city staff throughout this design process, and staff are confident that the delivered systems will meet the needs of the city. The scope of work predominantly covers the broadcast system in the new council chambers, including high-definition cameras, microphones, and broadcast lighting. Work will also be performed in spaces associated with the council chambers, namely the multi-purpose community room, the council chambers overflow conference room, and the council chambers lobby. Separately, the scope also covers work in the second floor Police Special Operations Conference Room. The cost of equipment and installation services will not exceed $750,000 and is funded by the 16 South Summit Avenue Building Capital Improvement Fund. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? If not, would someone like to move the resolution?
I'll move the resolution.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dennis. Please express our thanks not only to Ron and Brian, but to everybody who's worked on this.
It was a very large team effort, so.
Yeah, we thank everybody. Frank.
Yes.
Your turn.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. As you said, my name is Frank Johnson. I'm here to present what was discussed back on January the 6th. This is a proposal to seek introduction of an ordinance to amend chapters in Chapter 19, Sections 19.4 and 19.5, which I've actually brought to you a few years ago talking about bicycles. I'd like to say it was a month or two ago, but sometimes time is longer than I really think it is. It actually was a few years ago. Just by way of background, with passage of the resolution on January the 6th, approving 2 MOUs to participate in the bike share program and to also the dockless vehicle sharing demonstration programs, staff recommended that some city code changes should be reviewed and perhaps introduced to address docking bikes, e-bikes, and e-scooters, that is, dockless vehicles. The attached ordinance would therefore amend Section 19.4 by adding in, since we're making amendments anyway, references to some vehicles that we hadn't referenced before in terms of the restrictions on sidewalks, These are just based on new amendments to the state's transportation article. Second, amendments to subsection B, that is of 19.4, to define electric bicycles and electric scooters, which not a definition we had before, in a way that's consistent with state and Montgomery County law. Subsection B would then specify some specific limits, 10 miles per hour, which we had talked about before, and I know there might be some questions about that, requiring a sidewalk width of at least 3 feet, and this is for actually the e-bikes or e-scooters. Helmets for anybody under age 16, which is these are also the same rules in place for bicycles. Front and rear lighting if at night, and a prohibition while carrying a package or operating two of them. Subsection C changes would add these vehicles to what's in place already for bicycles and electric bikes, yielding the right of way, giving an audible signal before overtaking a pedestrian, and speed on sidewalks to 10 miles an hour. Again, I understand there might be some concern about that. Were that to be changed or even eliminated or added to, or that is increased, proposing the more restrictive amount would make it, you could allow that change without doing another public hearing. Amendments to subsection D would specify city manager discretion to make some other changes. As to section 19.5, this would add dockless vehicles to existing bicycle restrictions, and then would add some recommended restrictions, again for the dockless vehicles. The main thing is leaving them around. Where are they going to be parked? That they have to be in an upright position. They're not allowed to be in the public parked left in the public right of way unless that area is designated for that kind of parking. Leaving them in a driveway without the owner's permission, a sidewalk, bus stop, loading zone, handicap parking zone, or any area where it's also prohibited by signage. Subsection C would allow parking restrictions by signage, and then subsection D allows enforcement, somewhat as with temporary signs that we're talking about, which would allow these vehicles to be removed under existing city law, which is section 14.4, certainly used for unattended vehicles. Tonight, simply seeking introduction of the draft ordinance. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Frank. I know Neil has got some questions.
Well, I'm still not happy about the 10-mile-an-hour speed limit. I think it's very unrealistic. By state law and in most jurisdictions in the United States and in fact the world, electric bikes, e-bikes are required to be governed to a limit of 20 miles an hour. And as the representative of e-bike owners here on the council, I believe I'm the only one, I'd say riding your e-bike at 10 miles an hour just feels like you're not really even moving. I don't find it to be unsafe. I've ridden on city sidewalks for the last several years since we passed the ordinance making me legal doing it. The city sidewalks are not terribly busy. I know that when the question came up last time we had this discussion, it was suggested that driving at 15 or 20 miles an hour on the sidewalk and approaching a curb at the end of the street and crossing the street was dangerous. Well, I don't keep going at 15 or 20 miles an hour when I'm ready to cross the street because I enjoy life and would like to continue enjoying it. Just normal, if you're crossing a street or approaching a pedestrian or any other obstacle, you're not going to go at the same speed you are when you have an open road.
And there are other protections for pedestrians that would be included.
Correct. And frankly, throughout most of our city, the sidewalks aren't really terribly busy. We're not Manhattan here. I mean, Old Town, the sidewalks get busy, and I wouldn't ride my bike or recommend riding a bicycle or an e-bike on the sidewalks in Old Town. I know some of my colleagues don't agree with that either, but I think the speed limit is arbitrary and not realistic for the way these vehicles are being used.
We can certainly include for introduction a speed limit that you're more comfortable with. I don't want to speak on behalf. We simply proposed what we had included in the proposal before, and part of the thinking was if we include a higher speed limit and then try to reduce it, if we've gone to a public hearing on that, that would require another public hearing. If we have a lower speed limit that what's introduced, then what's ultimately passed, if you introduce the lower one, that doesn't require a public hearing, but anything can be proposed. I am not an expert e-bike user, so I'm simply following the, to some extent, direction from staff and working with Sergeant Sharp to some extent on that, but he did indicate, as I recall when we spoke on January 6th, that in terms of specific enforcement, it's very hard to argue that there's a huge difference between 10 and 20 miles an hour either. So,
I don't know about that. I guess I'd like to see some video examples of the difference between riding.
I said in terms of enforcement.
In terms of enforcement?
That there
Okay.
would be
Yes.
very little difference because at that low a speed, it's rather, as he was explaining, and I'm speaking for him to some extent, very difficult to calculate the difference between the 10, 15, and even as high as 20.
Any other questions or comments? Again, this is just an introduction, so we would then go to public hearing. And so would someone like to move to introduce?
I'll move to introduce. So the issue is if we introduce, so the 10-mile-an-hour speed limit applies to any bicycle, any two-wheel vehicle, not just an electric bike, but
You're correct.
But if
on
we,
the sidewalk.
if we ultimately
on the sidewalk, right?
If we ultimately determine that it should be higher, that would be a lesser restriction, which we would be able to do.
So we'd be able to do that without another hearing, I guess.
Correct.
So I'll move to introduce as.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, carries 4-0. It is introduced.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
Laura May Food, thank you for waiting so long to get to your agenda item, which is about parking in Old Town.
Yes.
Where you shouldn't ride your bike on the sidewalks.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. This is policy discussion for text amendment CTAM 8336-2019. A joint public hearing for this text amendment was held on December 2nd, 2019. No further changes have been made to the draft ordinance since the public hearing. As discussed during the public hearing, this amendment addresses on-site parking in the Old Town District as well as a minor housekeeping item. This map on the screen outlines the Old Town District in blue here. The city's current parking ordinance does not require on-site parking for changes in use or redevelopment of property within the Old Town District. This provision was originally put in place with a sunset date and is due to expire this month. This amendment proposes to continue to not require on-site parking in the Old Town District without a sunset date. The development pattern in Old Town makes it difficult for many of the properties to provide on-site parking, and staff is of the opinion that this parking exemption has had a positive impact in Old Town and led to new business growth. Some questions were raised during the hearing regarding the availability of parking in Old Town. Staff included an additional exhibit in your packet, Exhibit 14, which shows parking counts that were conducted for the parking garage in Old Town this past summer. Counts showed just over 50% occupancy at midday and just over 20% occupancy in the evening. Staff is of the opinion that there is adequate parking in Old Town. Any perception of a lack of parking may be just because people are not sure of where it is located. The housekeeping item included in this amendment addresses short-term rentals in the RH zone. The RH zone was not included in the short-term rental ordinance that was adopted this past October. This amendment allows short-term rentals as an accessory use in the RH zone, which is consistent with what was approved for the other residential zones in the city back in October. The Planning Commission recommended approval of CTAM 8336-2019 during their January 8th, 2020 meeting. The Mayor and City Council's record closed at 5 p.m. on January 16th, 2020, and prior to the record closing, no further testimony had been received. The draft ordinance for CTAM 8336-2019 is ready for final action should the council so choose, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So again, this exemption of the parking requirement in Old Town is part of what we consider a robust suite of economic incentives for people to make it more attractive to redevelop and promote economic development in the Old Town area. So I still think it's necessary. I do agree that we're slowly turning this ship around, but there are things happening. But even though I have no vote here, I would agree with it. Yes.
I would just add, from an urban planning and an environmental perspective, it also has benefits. It's, primarily an economic development tool, but I think there are those benefits as well. I did have one question. I don't know if staff considered this as an option, but why remove the sunset altogether as opposed to, say, just extending it another 5 years so that we could revisit it, or another 10 years so that we could revisit it? Is it just because we've sort of come to the conclusion that there's no need to go through that process again, and that there's really nothing about this exemption that needs to be temporary? Or is it, or is there some other reason?
No, it really was because it was put in place initially as a test period, and we didn't see any big negative impacts of it. We haven't seen issues with parking in Old Town as a result, so we don't think it's necessary to do an additional test period.
Yeah, I guess the worst case scenario concern I would have is that, at some point down the road, 10, 15 years, whatever, Old Town, really takes off far beyond our wildest imaginations, and it's flourishing, and we get to a point where we actually want to impose some parking requirement back onto Old Town as a result of congestion, and then it's always harder to put it back after we've permanently taken it away, as opposed to just not further extend a sunset. I don't consider that a major objection, and I'm happy to support what's before us, but I guess that was something that I was just sort of thinking about, if that ever become an issue.
Yeah, I have a similar concern. If there's a assembly of properties that are put together, say at the corner of Summit and East Diamond, from that corner there, in which all of that was going to be redeveloped into a building, residential, mixed-use type of first floor retail, office, and residential above, in which a lot of that parking behind those buildings was eliminated. They would have to park it, right?
It is something that would be reviewed as, the site plan process, and it's something that staff would work with the applicant on, and also the Planning Commission could push the applicant, as potentially they could also add a condition onto the approval to have the applicant prove that they can somehow provide enough parking on site.
Yeah, because we would eliminate public park, that such a development would eliminate public parking behind that section of buildings. Presumably, any development plan there would include building on existing parking. Right?
Yes,
so
it would.
There would be a significant loss of public parking. So I think I'm uncomfortable not having the sunset on there, or taking that off. So same discomfort that Ryan expressed.
So you would support the
removal of the?
Yeah.
You mean making it permanent? The
thing that's before us is making it permanent.
Yeah. Just a little bit nervous about that. That's where I stand on that. So
okay.
I'm not sure.
It seems like now this item is in jeopardy.
I wouldn't say it's in jeopardy. I'd say if we made a final decision that we wanted to extend it at least another 5 years, we'd basically just be kicking the can down the road, but it would give us the opportunity to, decide later on, depending on what developments may have occurred in Old Town. But we're not going to, I don't think there's any desire to not extend it at this point. It's just a question of whether we're extending it permanently or extending it for a period of time.
Could we do that at this point? Could we put back the sunset on it at this point?
We could, because that would be more restrictive. Yeah.
It would be a lesser. It would be a lesser restriction.
Yeah.
It would be a
lesser restriction.
A lesser act than, I don't know how you describe that.
Kind
but
of
it would be less.
it's a double negative built in there.
Right.
All right.
Because I think at least until we see what happens with the Fishman site and any complications or limitations on parking.
Neil?
Just the question is, there been any conversation about additional wayfinding signs so that people can find parking? Because it seemed like there was a gap between perception and reality that you pointed out, and
That is something that staff can look into, for sure.
Okay, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so does someone want to move this with the amendment that we have a 5-year sunset?
I'll move that.
Yeah.
I'll move that.
Second.
Okay.
So it would be a 5-year extension on the pre-existing sunset that expired on February 2nd.
That's kosher.
So the proposed ordinance would extend it indefinitely without
Right.
any sunset?
Right, so we're amending that.
So you would change it to
put
put
5-year
another 5-year,
period.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Put it on your calendar.
5 years from now.
Come back in 5 years.
You know, we'll extend it another 5 years, or we'll make it
All right,
permanent then.
we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries 4-0. Thank you, Laura. Next, Chris Berger. And sketch plan for the CPSC site.
Good evening. This is a policy discussion for sketch plan application SK 8271 2019 for a future city park at the former Consumer Product Safety Commission site. On the screen I have the plan, which proposes a 9.54 acre park with parking, community gardens, a bicycle skills course, open space pavilions, playgrounds, fitness pods, walking trails, and the potential for an up to 15,000 square foot recreational building. The Council and Planning Commission conducted a joint public hearing on December 2nd, 2019. During the course of the hearing, the following aspects of the proposed plan were discussed: the establishment of a pedestrian connection from the park to Treeworthy Road, which is to the west of the proposed park, what fencing will surround the property, what has changed since the plan since 2016 when we had the ad hoc committee presentation to the council, where a potential future building will be located, and would the addition of pedestrian access require a new sketch plan. There were 3 speakers from the public at that public hearing who expressed frustration with the speed of the park's development and hope for easier connectivity to the Wesley neighborhood to the west. The Planning Commission's record closed on December 27th, 2019, and the members recommended approval at their January 8th, 2020 meeting. The Mayor and Council's record closed on January 14th of this year. 2 public comments were entered into the record. 1 comment requested basketball and soccer fields at the park, and the other comment requested a skate park. There are now 19 exhibits in the record file. Staff is supportive of SK 8271 2019. The sketch plan application will help the city achieve its goal of providing parks within a quarter mile of residential communities. The proposed park provides a variety of recreational activities for the nearby residential communities, mostly Wesley and Washingtonian Woods. The plan meets and accomplishes the purposes, objectives, and minimum standards and requirements of the MXD zone. It is in accord with the applicable master plan recommendations of the 2009 land use element of the master plan and the 2018 Parks, Recreation, and Culture element. The plan is internally and externally compatible with existing and planned uses in the MXD zoned area and adjacent areas. Staff would also like to add that the schematic development plan, the next step in the park's approval process, is scheduled for joint public hearing with the Council and Planning Commission on March 2nd.
Hallelujah.
That plan will address specific locations for play areas, pathways, and structures. A draft resolution for SK 8271 2019 is included in the packet and is ready for final action should the council so choose. And joining me tonight is Carolyn Mueller, the interim interim director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. Do you have any questions?
Carolyn, did you want to add anything, or are you just here for questions?
Basically for questions.
Okay.
Yes.
So you get to sit through that whole meeting just for questions?
Just for questions.
Well, I have a question. Ms.
Go
Miller.
ahead,
So,
please.
just quickly, to confirm, this sketch plan proposes a number of uses inside the site. The SDP, of course, will specify, as you said, exactly where those uses will go and what they will be. But nothing about the sketch plan commits us to any of those specific uses, does it? I mean, if we suddenly decided at the SDP phase that we, just hypothetically here, wanted to get rid of a bicycle skills course from the list of amenities inside the park, we wouldn't be bound to that by virtue of the sketch plan, would we?
From what I understand, this is a broad
Yeah.
overview, so you can pare it back from here.
Okay, great. And of course, I just want to once again reiterate my agreement with the folks who testified in the public hearing that we want to get this moving as soon as possible. So I'm glad to hear that the SDP is coming before us soon.
So the main thing that oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Neil.
All right, thanks. I'm just have one really quick question, which is relating to the interest in the folks from Wesley at developing some sort of entrance for their community. Is there any feasible way to do that at this point?
So at this point, we've had some preliminary discussion with them, and actually the Deputy City Manager, Enslinger, is...
We are currently working with the neighborhood to look at possible locations. Again, one of the issues is there isn't a street that dead ends like with the other neighborhoods, so we would have to work with some property owners that were willing to give an easement between their two houses. We have been starting that negotiation.
Is it looking promising?
They're doing door to door to kind of give us a feel, because they don't. The other complication we have with Wesley is there's no overarching HOA. That's an organized HOA, so it's really case by case basis. So some members of the neighborhood have agreed to kind of go out first and kind of gauge it, and then we will engage them once we get a better idea of what the neighborhood's looking for.
All right.
But the sketch plan proposed tonight does account for the possibility of a future connection if we can make one happen.
We've always discussed that even during the preliminary plan phases when we had the committee. It's just trying to get the property owners to agree to provide that easement can be difficult.
Yeah, that was basically the issue I was going to bring up too. So I think, the biggest problem is that the proximity of the homes to each other doesn't make for much space for an easement. And it isn't, I know one of the residents specifically came here to talk about that problem because the proposed path was right through their yard.
It's the width of the sign.
So.
In my discussion with the project manager, Sunil, he did say that is actually something that could be added later after the park is developed. It's not something that has to be put into the plan at this time.
It's the major issue since there's no HOA here. It's really the discussion and negotiation within two individual property owners in Wesley. Once you figure that out, that's the biggest problem. Anyway.
And we also remember that there is a pedestrian walkway that will go from the entrance, which basically is where their street comes out onto 28, and then there will be a pedestrian walkway.
Their only entrance is through via 28.
Yes.
So
let's hope that works out.
Well, the needs of the the desires of the neighborhood don't trump the rights of the individual homeowners that would have to provide that property to do this. So it's hard for us to do much else other than to try and negotiate. So
you want to move the resolution?
I'm happy to move this resolution after a lot of years.
Okay,
congratulations. Looking forward to this happening.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
From the city attorney.
Nothing further.
From any other staff? Okay. Not seeing anything. Okay. Again, next week, our work session will be with the Board of Supervisors of Elections on a debrief on the 2019 elections. That's Monday, February 10th, 7:30 p.m. Until next time, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.